But you never know who else he's managed to get on his side. You know what people are like. Always looking for a way to improve their own position. There's more, my lord, Anaya said in her brusque, no-nonsense voice. They delivered the message in the form of Mattis. For a moment there her breath faltered. It was barely noticeable, but my senses easily honed in on the little sign of weakness, emotion. He's alive? I asked, and I felt a pang of surprise at the sound of my own voice. I sounded incredibly cold and uncaring. In fact, I really felt a bit that way. It all didn't matter as long as Brittany was alive and unharmed. She nodded slowly. Barely, my lord. He needs healing, but Ryan is already on it. There's a lot of glass in his wounds that needs to be removed first. It was good to hear that one of the more capable healers amongst my employees and subjects was taking care of the injured guard. Good to know that he was here to take care of the injured after the battle that was soon to ensue. Spit it out, Anaya. You still haven't told me everything, I told the woman, unable at the moment to sugarcoat my voice, to make myself sound nice and decent. But she took it in stride and nodded. They demand you hand them Andy, my lord. Andy's life in exchange for Brittany's. A hushed silence fell across the room the instant her words left her mouth. Then all at once, various male voices around me cursed in various languages. Even Sam let loose a stream of colorful words. It didn't surprise me, though. That means their father is involved too, I told my trusted generals. The demon has been unable to reach Andy since he's been under my roof and is getting desperate. I suspect he has the ability to steal powers from others if he's allowed the chance, and he's been trying to create a demon offspring that holds a certain power that could be incredibly destructive should he obtain it. And Andy has it, nodded Samuel in a guttural growl. The dirty bastard thinks to kill the boy and take it for himself. Get in more fighters, I don't care where you get them from as long as they're loyal. The order left my mouth in a growl as I whirled to face Lysander. He was young, but a mastermind at arranging any kind of logistics. Samuel could do it, but he'd be more effective here with me. The Jotun was good at calming my anger, a little. He straightened immediately and touched his fist to his heart, and then his forehead in a salute all of my Taui Shakta had started to use. You can count on me, he spoke, and I sensed he was grateful to be given a job. The man couldn't stand waiting here for news any more than I could. I saw Anaya cast a look over her shoulder at the door, and I knew she too needed to be in action. I sensed she wanted to check up on the injured guard Mattis. Were they friends, possibly? Go, Anne. As long as you're ready for battle in a moment's notice. I think it's all right if you check up on Mattis now. If he needs it, I'll come to heal him, I said. And finally, the rough edges had almost disappeared from my voice, and I sounded more like my usual self. Anaya didn't say a word as she darted out the door, her long hair whirling behind her and her leather clothes rippling as she moved. There were blades and knives strapped to her in practically every place possible, but instead of looking ridiculous and heavy, she made it look deadly and dangerous. Anaya was the best knife thrower I knew of, and she was bloody scary when pissed off, and despite her clear disability, she was more dangerous than most angels I knew. Having been born without wings, she had learned to be tougher than nails. Because I, too, needed to be doing something, I manifested my armor on the desk besides my weapons and started manually strapping the leather on. Around me, I noted that Samuel manifested his own set of armor straight on his body, and that Sarah and Bob were both getting their own armor and weapons ready. Surprisingly so was Deidre, with a very determined look on her face that only softened every time Bob looked at her. It was, I suppose, a relief to see that they had made up and forgiven each other for whatever had happened in the past. Brittany had told me some of it, but I knew she didn't want to share too much because it was private and painful. Mostly for Deidre, as she'd said. I didn't hold back another angry growl as I saw images of Brittany hurt or dead dance before my eyes. We would save her, get her back in one piece unharmed, no matter the cost, I vowed to myself. All too soon, I'd tied closed the last lace on my arm braces. Heavy boiled leather decorated with ancient Celtic symbols no human understood the meaning of nowadays. Shin guards in similar fashion protected my legs over the silky, supple leather pants. I wore no shirt or chest guard as was common among the Celtic warriors of old, instead preferring the unfettered freedom of movement. My vampire skin, infused with my own power, could hold off any human weapon anyway. It was only demon and dragon fire that I needed worry about, or possibly the claws of a weir. Not that Fort or his pups would get within touching distance. The only thing that covered my chest now were the leather straps that held my swords, belted to my back. easy to draw and sheath whenever I wanted, just like the dagger strapped to my hip and the set of knives I carried in a holster around my left thigh. Sarah appeared with a bowl of blue dye and a bowl of ochre dye beside me and smiled gently. "For luck, Alex." I nodded and allowed her to draw patterns of protection spells across my chest and back and arms in true Celtic warrior fashion. It was just like old times, when I would go out to fight another battle to keep my family safe. Only this time, I had a horde of friends at my back. Even Samuel had allowed Sarah to draw patterns across his breastplate and arms, although he looked a little uncomfortable about it. I didn't see Deidre anywhere now, but as we all made our way down to the lawn, I spotted her right away. Dressed in leathers herself and painted in Celtic spells, she was putting the dye on each of the warriors standing on the lawn with a focused look on her face. Sarah hurried to join her in the work, and if I hadn't been so furious and anxious to get going, I would have laughed. All the men and women out there were seasoned warriors, but they all allowed the two women to paint them blue and yellow, several giving me frowns as if to say they didn't really appreciate the sentiment. But since I had donned the paints, they each felt unable to decline. Lysander's face in particular was priceless, as Sarah started her work of finger paint on his bare chest and back, while Jaden, now in panther form, was purring in contentment while Deidre ran paint across his black fur, creating beautiful blue and ochre swirls. Saratin materialized from the dark beside me all of a sudden and nodded. "She's there. Place is swarming with wolves, but they're mostly pups. There's an evil inside the house though, and Thornton's men are patrolling the premises." The black man swept his eyes across the lawn to look at all the warriors gathered and nodded. "We will manage. I see that there's more arriving every minute. Good. Let's move out," I ordered. Gistas, H's, Oftry, Fime, Untelial, and Thinkter and Jectors. "Well, Levery descended is it too? We have duttered to something down the hen and find Evertamia. We have duttered the stairs to the hole they'd locked me up in." I knew it couldn't have actually been hours, because my stomach hadn't warned me for dinner yet, but it felt like eternity. It was cold and damp, and even though it seemed like I'd found the connection between my mind and that of Tlanextic, he had not responded. Nor had I noticed anything from Alexander. Were they really unable to find me? What was going on? The sliding of bars against the door indicated that someone was opening the door, and I backed away from it and turned my back to the wall, making sure I could face whoever was coming in and that they couldn't surprise me. The door swung open with a squeaking noise, because the hinges were a little rusted, and then Stephanie strutted into the room wearing high heels and a swishing silky dress that made her look drop-dead gorgeous. And drop-dead you would if you let her sink her claws into you. "Here she is, Brium," she said huskily, clearly putting up her best seductive act towards the man that followed her into the room. He was of average height, but that was all that was average about him, I noted as I took in his appearance. No older than 30 at the most. I knew that looks could be deceiving, and instead relied on the feeling of age that rolled off him. He was old, at least twice as old as Alexander, of that I was sure. His skin was pale and unblemished and flowed over a powerful physique, built for war and combat, as indicated by the dark clothes he wore, only relieved by the flash of steel, a long, thin blade at his side, and heavy buckles on his boots. Hair as white as snow fell sleekly across his forehead and over his ears, but it was his eyes that got me the moment they turned to me and focused on my face. A red so intense that it seemed his eyes were consumed in flames, stared at me with such disdain and disgust that I stumbled back until I could feel the wall at my back. Thin lips quirked up just a little at my obvious shock and fear. "Yes, leave us, Siren," he spoke, and my skin prickled as goosebumps broke out all over my body. I knew that voice. Stephanie hid her disappointment well and started out of the basement, daring to run a manicured hand over the demon's chest in passing. He didn't hide the fact that he stared appreciatively at her backside as she made her way up the stairs. Turning to me, he smirked and stepped closer till I felt him crowd in on my personal space, my heart thumping erratically in my throat. She'll be dead before all this is over. But it would be a shame not to have a little taste before that happens, don't you think? He said to me as he lifted one pale hand to my face. I turned my head sideways to avoid him, but he reacted with a growl. Then suddenly his hand was around my throat and he lifted me off my feet. Gasping for breath, I clutched at the fingers digging into my skin and crushing my windpipe. "You've been out of my grasp for far too long, little one," he growled, squeezing his fingers a little before suddenly releasing me and stepping back. Wheezing and gasping, I fell to the floor, my throat a burning agony as I labored to get enough oxygen into my lungs. I glared up at him. What do you want of me? Of you? Nothing. You're absolutely useless, but you'll serve to get me the boy. I'm sure your mate will hand him over in a heartbeat to save you, he said gleefully. Never, I exclaimed, knowing in my heart and soul that Alexander would never even consider it. He considered Andy as much part of his family now as I was. Alexander wouldn't even sacrifice Deidre now because she was Bob's mate. Oh, but he already did, little angel, the demon in front of me spoke. He already agreed to our terms. Hurts, doesn't it? To see how even your mate can be corrupted. I was shaking my head in disbelief even though it hurt my bruised throat. No, you are wrong. It's not true. It's a pity you've been promised to the pup, or I'd have had some more fun with you, my daughter, he spoke. Bending down, he ran the nails of his hand across the bare skin of my throat, across the mark, and I shivered in disgust. I knew better now than to pull away. Now I'm not supposed to damage you beyond repair. He rolled his eyes as if he thought that was utterly ridiculous. At least you've done me proud by resisting coming here on your own accord. Another semi-effectio Alex stroke of his hands across my skin. I tensed completely and pulled my legs close to my chest, shame and guilt washing over me for my own stupidity. I had resisted, but not hard enough. They'd still managed to get me into the car, without making a single sound of alarm. He laughed a mirthless kind of sound, and those flaming red eyes flared up brighter. I had a distinct feeling of heat on my face as he leaned in, like a raging inferno heating up the room and my skin. The demon shifted so he was kneeling beside me and leaned his face in closer, my heart nearly bursting out of my chest in fear, my body completely immobilized by some unseen force, the heat intensifying as if I'd stepped even closer to the inferno. I felt a nail in the hollow of my throat again. Loyalty, that's what it says here, doesn't it, daughter mine? Caressing a dark curl of ogham writing on my skin, part of my mark. He scoffed loudly. Such a silly sentiment. A prickle and then a stinging pain. His nail broke the skin and it sent a hot wave of pain rolling across my entire body. If I hadn't been restrained by unseen bonds, I'd have been trashing wildly on the concrete floor. As it was, all I could do was bite my tongue till it bled to keep in the screams of pain. As soon as it came, however, it left and the demon stood back and looked down on me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a boy to drain and kill and a Regis to murder. I'll see you again once you've finished the pup, or not if you do succumb to him. He sounded like he didn't care either way what happened to me. A second later, he was out the door. I still couldn't move and I'd clenched my eyes shut to keep in the tears. I clearly heard the bars slide in front of the door to lock me in, but I couldn't move from my rolled-up position on the ground yet. The invisible bonds had gone, but my muscles were all cramped up from the assault of pain. How was I going to get out of here? Was Alexander going to hand him Andy? And was Thornton involved in all of this as well? How many creatures were even in the house right now? Besides that other demon and the wolves I'd seen when they brought me in? Oh, if only I could reach them somehow, or even till an X-stick. When the first bang resounded through the house, I scrambled to my feet and hurried to the door. There was a small crack to one side and I tried to peer through it to see what was going on. The guard was cursing, but he still remained in front of the door. What was that noise? It almost sounded like something very heavy slamming into a wall. As I focused on the noises coming from above me, I realized it sounded like fighting. Real fighting going on up there. Was that Alexander and his people up there fighting the wolves? My heartbeat sped up at the thought that they were trying to get me out of here. Worry making my stomach clench painfully. What if someone got hurt? Or worse, got killed? It didn't matter that I knew that it wasn't my fault for ending up here. Well, not entirely at least. I should have fought harder. I felt horribly violated that Fort had managed to do so, that he'd gotten into my head somehow and made me get in that bloody car against my own will. Plaster rained down from the ceiling as another quake shook the building. Grinding noises were heard from upstairs. It made my guard on the other side of the door curse loudly and then hurry up the stairs to investigate. As far as I knew, there were no fault lines nearby, so a natural earthquake seemed very unlikely. What could have caused the quakes then? The thought of that gave me chills, and I sincerely hoped it was Lysander in his dragon form. More plaster fell from the ceiling, and cracks appeared along the walls, hairline fractures near the door. The single light bulb above me flickered, and then fell down with a crash, bathing the room in semi-darkness. If I didn't find a way to get out of here soon, the ceiling might collapse on top of me, burying me alive. To emphasize that, a really heavy bang rumbled through the building. The shocks were coming harder and faster now, and still shaking from the pain the demon, my birth father, had inflicted on me. I had to struggle to remain standing. My breathing still came in short, painful gasps, because every movement inflicted another short burst of pain at the center of my throat, right at the word loyalty that the demon had pierced with his sharp, claw-like nail. Just as I'd reached the door and started pushing and pulling in the hope the door had been weakened, I heard footsteps. It sounded like the muffled clicking of heels. That could only mean one person, and I climbed to my feet quickly, swaying in the process when it seemed like the entire building was shaking. If Stephanie was coming back to either get me and hurt me, or simply hurt me, I wouldn't go without a fight. Spotting a jagged piece of concrete on the floor, I picked it up and held it like a dagger, if need be. I'd either stab her or knock her out. Either way, I was going to try to get away from her if she was alone. The bars in front of the door slid away noisily. At the same time, a tearing noise echoed through the room. A crack appeared like a thin line right along the middle of the tiny basement chamber, and I hurriedly stepped over it towards the door. If that crack widened, I'd be better off near Stephanie instead of trapped on the other side. When the door swung open, it was slowly, and I could hear heavy breathing, as if it was a struggle to get that heavy thing open. It was obvious that it didn't entirely fit into the frame any longer, as it grated along the floor. I couldn't see who it was in the limited light, but when the door was fully opened, a female form was silhouetted against the light. She was clearly alone. My fingers tensed around the rock in my hand. "Brittany, are you okay?" A tentative voice drifted into the room softly, barely heard over the loud noises of fighting and settling stone. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm going to help you escape," the voice added, and she sounded unsure and even a little scared. It took a moment for me to realize who it was, but when I did, my eyes widened in shock. Jennifer? I couldn't believe it. Was the stuck-up girl really going to help me, or was this some kind of ploy? It couldn't be, could it? I had no reason to trust her whatsoever, but I also knew that staying down here would probably get me killed. "Oh, thank God. You're alive." "I wasn't. Oh, I really thought the demon had gotten to you," Jennifer exclaimed as she stepped into the room, shining light in my direction with a black flashlight. The thing almost as thick as her wrist, and clearly made of metal, one of those heavy emergency ones. I could see that she had dust covering nearly every inch of her. Obviously, the plaster elsewhere in the house had followed the same fate as that of the plaster in the small basement room. She was wearing snug-fitting jeans and a long-sleeved shirt, but there were still heels on her feet. How could she walk in them when the building shook so much? Stumbling, I made my way towards her and the door, to freedom. "No, I'm okay. Just a little dizzy," I added the last as my head spun and my vision swam in and out of focus for a moment. A loud rumble shook through the building, and then I heard the noise of falling stone. "Watch out!" Jennifer was screaming, my body automatically jumping forward and my arms coming up to cover my head. Not fast enough. The thought crossed my mind the moment a sharp pain shot through my left leg, the appendage crumbling and sending me sprawling to the hard floor. I managed to catch myself on my hands, but I didn't even have to look to know that a rock from the ceiling had hit me. The pain, eerily similar to how my wrist had felt when it had been broken, told me that my leg had followed the same fate. I had to focus on my breathing to get my vision to clear, and the ringing in my ears to subside. Jennifer was cursing a blue streak I didn't expect from her as she scrambled towards me, hands running over my back, and then a sharp jolt of pain through my leg again. I nearly blacked out from it, but then it eased, and I realized she'd lifted the debris off of me. "Can you walk?" A soft voice, soothing tones, and it told me my leg was a mess. She just didn't want to scare me with the reality of it. "I doubt it," I gritted out as I pushed myself up on my hands and twisted so my weight was on my other leg. "I'll have to help you then." The hands from before returned, one slipping around my waist, the other slinging my arm across her shoulders. Surprisingly, Jennifer pulled me up with little effort. She was clearly stronger than she looked. Gasping because breathing was still painful and because my left leg was a searing agony. "We can't stay here. Need to get out of this building before it falls down. I don't know what's going on outside, Brittany, but there's a dragon there and a whole horde of demons and wolves. I really hoped that dragon was Lysander because that would mean Alexander was here too. Jennifer seemed to sense what I wanted to hear and ask. Or maybe she simply knew because she added, I didn't see Alexander, but I know he's out there. With loads of his own people. Thank you, I told her as we made our way slowly to the door. I couldn't put any weight on my broken leg. Jennifer was practically carrying me. With Alexander nearby and Fort probably out there fighting too, I might have a chance to reach someone, anyone, telepathically. Closing my eyes for a moment to focus, I reached out towards my mate only to be bounced back by the same wall as before. My head was already spinning and pounding painfully in time with my leg and throat, so I hardly even noticed the pain from that backslash. Sarah and Andy were out of reach too. Only that golden line towards my grandfather was in reach, taunting me. Sending thoughts along it, I knew, even before trying, that he wouldn't respond. He'd lied when he said all I had to do was think of him and he'd come to help. Aya, please? We need help. We were nearly at the door when a voice cut through the air with a snap, reminding me of a whiplash. What are you doing? It was of course Stephanie, and her question was directed at Jennifer. The girl struggled to step closer to the door and maintain balance for the both of us, while everything around us was shaking and crumbling. Yet she stiffened at hearing her mother's voice. Now she'd tell her mother she was just getting me out because I wasn't worth anything dead, or something similar that would sound plausible to her mother. That, or it turned out she was here on orders after all. I'm helping her, Jennifer said, her voice clear and loud as she spoke in a short lull in the shocks and quakes that drowned out most of the sounds of fighting. Helping her? Why would you do that? You should be helping me. Stephanie sounded utterly surprised, in shock almost. Helping you, Jennifer scoffed as she stepped forward with me, closing in on her mother. You're working with not one but two filthy rapists, using an innocent as a bargaining chip and willing to kill a little boy. I'm not helping you with that. So that's how it is? Seemed like Jennifer had standards and morals after all, and her limit had been reached. Right in time to help me. Was this why she'd been dressing more demurely off late and had cut down the flirting with all the boys in school? Rage was filtering across Stephanie's face along with confusion. Clearly she didn't understand what was going on. Why Jennifer was doing this? My thought process was rudely interrupted when the building shook, so heavily this time that we were all tossed around like we were nothing. The sounds in the small room all overruled by the grating and grinding, as if the whole house was coming apart. When things steadied, I felt something hot slowly drip into my eye, but the pain that should accompany it was strangely absent. The room was still spinning, however, even though the actual shaking had stopped. Stephanie was no longer in the doorway, but Jennifer and I were close by, and the girl was already pulling me up on my good leg, trying to get me out that door and up the stairs. A look over my shoulder showed me a gaping hole in the floor, a black abyss below, just a few feet from where we were standing. The floor had simply cracked open along the line I'd already spotted earlier. Somehow, Stephanie was on the other side, balanced on a slab of concrete that was only connected to the wall by the steel wires laced through it. It really was a good thing. Reinforced concrete had been used. Otherwise, Stephanie definitely would have fallen down that gaping hole. The woman, a siren I knew now, didn't seem overly concerned as she crouched there. Instead, she seemed mostly angry as she yelled, "You are picking her over me. She's nothing but a demon's spawn. How can you pick that thing over your very own mother?" Jennifer didn't reply as she pulled me slowly up the first step of the stairs, the building shaking again, and more rocks and ceiling fell down, tumbling into the gaping hole. They echoed loudly as they bounced. My head was starting to feel so heavy that I knew I was losing a lot of blood. Whatever had gashed my face had hit me hard enough to make me dizzy. Even the pain in my leg was gone, and I barely noticed the burning of my throat any longer. It was in fact a struggle to remain awake and conscious. "I'm your mother," I heard Stephanie scream, but it was vague and barely came over the ringing in my ears. "You can't leave me here." I was sure the woman said more, but it didn't register as words any longer. Instead, I focused on helping Jennifer, putting my legs forward and leaning on the wall instead of her as we slowly ascended the stone steps. The last thing I heard clearly was Jennifer's voice, loud and almost crystalline. She spoke, "I can and I will leave you. I'm doing the right thing for once in my life instead of listening to your lies." Was there hope for Jennifer after all? Anything else that might have been said I missed. A roaring in my ears that heralded that moment just before passing out. My vision field becoming smaller and smaller until all I saw was gray, and then an all-consuming black. The soft PBations of the soft PBations, the soft PBations of fleece of cunning my skin felt oddly strange, and that combined with the tilting motion that reminded me of waves. I felt dizzy, and my eyelids wouldn't open no matter how hard I tried. Something wet and sticky clung to the side of my face, pulling on the skin. Ourselves. I will have wet it thank you, and it was a comforting color with a related by background. White was good, white was safe. I liked white, especially this warm, cottony kind of white that enveloped me and comforted me. It seemed like I could hear a voice, but I felt too comfortable and safe to really respond to it. I'd rather stay in the nice white couldn't hurt me. When black started seeping in along the edges, I frowned. No, don't do that. But it was beyond my ability to stop it, and all too soon black enveloped me whole again. I was a quickly list axe, was a quickly sitting. I was a quickly list protectors, was a quickly setting. I was a quickly listing wrestles a quickly, and they're having butters of a quickly lists. I was a quickly list of was a quickly list. I was a quickly list, I was a quickly whisk. I couldn't even lift my palms to prevent it from happening again. My throat was burning. It felt parched as if I'd run a marathon in a desert, and breathing in air alone was painful. My head was spinning, and still I was unable to open my eyes. There were arms wrapped tightly around my torso, and I had the feeling of motion. Heavy breathing in my ear as someone struggled to lift me. What was happening? I tried to help, kicking out my legs to push, anything to move and get away from danger. Danger? What danger? A searing pain shot through my left leg as I hit something with it, even when I moved. Pain blossomed in my body. Why was the world tilted? What was going on? Who was with me? Who was? And all true over the worlds in my name of our time. Come down here now. My mommy's voice carried across the large open space, and I waved at her enthusiastically. Look at how high up I am, Mom, I told her as I spread out my arms for better balance. I was perched on top of a wooden beam about 7 inches wide and on the second floor of a derelict building. Well, it wasn't that derelict, just abandoned and old. Very old, and a little in disrepair. But it had all these really cool hidey holes and exciting little nooks and crannies that no adult could crawl into. They were too big for them. But tiny as I was, I could still hide there from the boogeyman and the demons. But most importantly, you could climb all the way to the top and see the most amazing view ever, which was what I was currently doing now. But Mommy didn't like it, and she couldn't follow me with the baby. Brittany, she yelled, and I ignored the fear seeping through her voice. I was safe. She didn't have to worry. It wasn't like before, where I knew she was right to be scared. Nothing could happen to me even if I did fall. I waved again and grinned down at her. Look, I can stand on one leg. Leaning forward like a ballerina, I lifted my left leg up in the air, my arms still spread out. For a moment, I stood like that on the slim beam that stuck out like a crooked tooth from a gaping hole on the side of the building. Woohoo! I yelled as the wind shook the beam and made it sway from left to right. A second later, I was tumbling through the open space between me and the ground, the earth rushing up to meet me at breakneck speed. I spread my arms even wider and yelled, not in fear, but in excitement. I was flying. Mom was screaming, but she couldn't see me now. Shrubbery and trees concealing me from her. A short moment was all it took, and then I was back on the earth, no longer soaring. My feet gently touching the ground as a man plucked me right out of the air. No words were spoken as I took in his golden red skin and black hair. He looked like an Indian. Like Grandma's tribe, but different too. And I smiled hesitantly. Hey, I'm Brittany. Who are you? The man frowned and then smiled back. Chamali, little one. Now, don't ever do that again. Forget. A touch on my forehead with a slightly calloused finger, and then the world turned black again. There was lead railing was Darius. There was nothing, and then my skin tingled everywhere. It was exposed, dust hitting it like a fine rain. I heard someone cough, and I was glad I didn't have to do that. My throat hurt too much for that to be very pleasant. I heard something like wind, movement, the sliding of feathers against each other, almost like wings rustling, and I struggled to open my heavy eyes. One wouldn't work at all, something sticky gluing the lashes together. The other, I managed to open a crack. The light was sharp and painful for a moment, but then things jumped into focus. The jagged teeth of a broken building around me? Was that the second floor of the house? What had happened? Around it, the garden had turned into a war zone. No plant or tree left upright and gaping holes in the ground here and there. I could see wolves, but most of them appeared to be retreating now, and there were demons as well, in all kinds of shapes and appearances. They were all fighting with human-looking people, presumably witches and vampires under Alexander's command. What filled my vision mostly was a set of huge wings, radiant and so white that they were almost blinding. The man they belonged to, tall and beautiful and toweringly intimidating. Black hair unbraided this time, but decorated still with red ribbons and golden beads and rings. I tried to open my mouth to speak to him. My grandfather had come for me after all, but my throat was burning so much that I couldn't form words. Jennifer, holding me, stepped back, pushing me behind her as if she meant to protect me. It jarred my leg and reminded me painfully that it was broken. Finally, my vocal cords seemed to work, and I croaked out, "That's my grandfather, Jennifer." "Oh," she replied, and then allowed Tlanextic to take me from her arms. He was warm and safe, and instantly the pain washed away, blackness threatening to take me away again. I was sure that Tlanextic wouldn't worry about Jennifer and leave her stranded here if I didn't intervene. I grasped his black shirt tightly and struggled to speak again. "Don't leave her." A moment later, I felt Jennifer's warm breath filter over my face as she squeaked, obviously startled. Then darkness again. Japarice's clothes. Sibarice's clothes to provide. Shibrice's clothes to proficiently was part of the prominence and down. The feeling rejuvenating and restoring. It made me feel whole and complete, and finally, it seemed like I could properly breathe again. I still couldn't open one eye, but it didn't hurt to open the other. It did feel like swimming through very murky water to reach the surface, but what I saw showed me the steel-gray eyes of my mate. Arriving at the house Brittany used to live in, I took careful notice of my surroundings, my senses fully extended so I wouldn't be caught unaware. Already I noticed the sense and mental signatures of 3 different wolves. I recognized them all from school, and knew I could dismiss them as a threat. Boys? Just little boys, that's what they were. Dragged into a conflict that wasn't theirs, because their alpha had lost it. I understood their loyalty nonetheless, and could even respect it in some way. That didn't mean they would escape punishment after this was all over, just that I'd be milder on them. Maybe I'd show some mercy, but that all depended on the outcome of today. They smelled uneasy, one even downright terrified, and I knew they'd all bolt as soon as the real fight started. If not, I knew my men would take care of them without any trouble. These kids were no match for my seasoned warriors. Harder to pick up were the scents and signatures of the more experienced fighters. But when I caught a whiff of the first, a man I'd known myself, I soon found more. The wide lawn gave plenty of cover for troops to hide, and Thornton was making good use of the area. Without a doubt, he really thought he had the upper hand. It made me uneasy. It could only mean he had some sort of ace up his sleeve. If he thought to install his own son as Regis here, it had to mean Edward was around somewhere too. A battle-hardened fighter with a mean streak even bigger than his father's, it was Edward who usually led in the punishments his father doled out to his people. More than 500 years ago, when I'd lived with my siblings in London under Raziel's rule, I'd once caught the bastard trying to force himself on Sarah. That had been the start of the animosity between me and Thornton. The vampire hadn't taken well to me roughing up his son. Never mind that Edward was at least 300 years older and a lot more vicious, and very much guilty of the crime I'd charged him with. He hadn't died from the punishment I'd meted out, nor had he learned from it. It was why rape in any form or kind was something I punished heavily. I would not ever tolerate it if I could help it. One simply did not take advantage of the weaker in a stick power play. Moving, so I could take a look at the other side of the house, I caught the distinct tangy smell of sulfur. Yes, the demon was here all right, and he'd brought his own little army. I was going to enjoy killing that bastard. I wasn't even shocked by the violent thought. That demon deserved 10 times over what was coming for him. That was one thing I was absolutely sure about. Jaden rubbed his huge head against my hand, and automatically my fingers curled tightly in his fur. "What is it?" I sent him the thought as I kept on scanning the grounds. I hope to catch a glimpse of either Thornton or the demon. Everyone is in position. Are you going to show yourself to negotiate? The cat asked me, his long tail swishing in excitement. Jaden was itching to start the fight and bloody his claws. With my mind, I sought out Seriton to confer shortly. I knew it was useless to negotiate. They'd only settle for my death and Andy's, and if I died, everyone I cared for might die too. I'd be giving the demon the most powerful weapon in history, Andy's destructive talent. And although I knew Samuel and Jaden, Anaya and Lysander and the others would all fight to keep Brittany and my siblings safe, they'd be on the losing side, I could not let that happen. Not to mention that my death would instantly mean Brittany's death too, now that we bonded in blood. My heart clenched painfully at that thought, and for a moment I wished I told her to wait just a few more days. I agree, my spy master said, but they might give you a hint as to where Brittany is. I nodded, and although Seriton was somewhere on the other side of the building, I knew he could sense my agreement. With a few quickly issued commands, I checked to see if Andy was secure. Another of my Taui CH Dealsakta, a cousin of Lysander and a dragon also, and Danis were taking him to my stronghold together with a detachment of heavy warriors. Its location unknown to even most of my normal Tsishich. They were on their way out of the house now. Danis needed to open space to teleport such a large group all at once. But I trusted the warriors there, all incredibly skilled in their own way to protect them. Satisfied with that, at least, I nodded to the witch behind me and the rest of the fighters gathered around me. When I give the signal, attack. Remember, priority is to keep the human civilians safe. If they see you, wipe their memories, I said. Danis's grandmother reached out her hand to me. The crone was old and wrinkled, her figure stooped and her hand as gnarled as an ancient oak. Do not worry, we planned evacuation procedures. Everyone knows what to do. You can go into combat unconcerned about the welfare of the humans. Fogging and scatter spells have been cast over the area. No human will enter and anyone here won't remember a thing. I forced myself to politely nod, smiling gratefully even though it felt more like a grimace. The muscles in my face just wouldn't cooperate, and I didn't feel like trying really hard anyway. Without saying anything else, I stepped out of the protective spell that had hidden our presence and strode across the lawn to the big house. The wolves I'd smelled earlier came out of hiding and circled me, confused because they recognized me from school. They'd known I was a vampire, and they'd known I was mated to Brittany, but stupidly, they'd been unaware I was their regis too. Now they shrunk back, as I allowed the heavy weight of my power to roll over them. If I wanted to, I could crush them in a heartbeat. They sensed this, and knew to avoid me. None of Thornton's men came out of hiding, but the door to the house opened. 3 vampires, a shifter, and a witch came out. All except the last more brawn than brain. They flanked Thornton as he stood on the steps, looking down on me past his nose with contempt. I wasn't impressed. The symbol of him standing higher than me wasn't lost. However, I was so much taller than the British vampire that I could easily look him in the eye anyway. Which didn't mean that he was frail or small by any means. A vampire of his power and age hadn't survived this long being weak. Thornton's blonde hair was tied back as always with a black ribbon, giving him that old-fashioned look. I knew his beliefs still dated from that time too. I knew that I couldn't let him know how much he had me driven into a corner, so I smirked arrogantly. Jonas, fancy seeing you here, I said mockingly, my voice carrying across the area easily. I could tell that the already skittish wolves were even more nervous now. At least my bravado worked on them. If Brittany had been harmed anyway, my fists clenched, aching to hold the smooth leather grip of my swords. My muscles almost twitching to swing the steel weight, cleave flesh. The fury and anger burned and seethed. The air around me crackled with it. Alex, have you come to surrender? Thornton asked me. The smirk around his lips told me he'd seen through my act. He knew he held my heart. Have you? I shot back, forcing a calming breath through my teeth. I knew this wasn't going anywhere. Cocky as ever, I never did like that about you, boy, the European Regis said. I'm going to enjoy breaking that pretty little spirit of hers. She screams so wonderfully. I heard Samuel's scream of warning, but didn't heed it as I darted across the lawn, my swords already in my hands, although I had no conscious memory of drawing them. I swung one black blade in a downward slash, cutting through the air with a whistling sound. Right where Thornton's throat had been a mere fraction of a second before. Continuing my momentum, I swung my second blade upward, cleaving open one of the vamp's belly, spilling entrails across the steps. My first blade sweeping out horizontally to decapitate the poor guy before he could even remotely start to regenerate. Growling told me Jaden had charged and was now fighting with more of Thornton's shifters behind me. Ignoring that, I turned to attack the others that had been guarding my fellow Regis. The witch was gone, and so was Thornton. So it was obvious that had been some sort of teleporter that he'd ordered to get him out as soon as I charged. Not all that strange. I knew the vampire was a coward at heart. He'd stab me in the back as soon as I left it unguarded. As I turned on the second vampire, he dodged a few of my swings, and we spun around each other even as the third tried to stab me when he had an opening. It was clear the two were used to fighting together as they flowed smoothly from combat stance to combat stance without hindering each other. As I ducked and rolled away from a blow from a huge pole axe, I swung one sword up in the air, sending it in a spinning arc. My empty hand. I turned to the axe-wielding guy, and with my powers he soon burst into flames, the red tongues licking across his skin like a lover's caress. I caught my sword by its handle again as it fell back from the sky, just in time to spin around and carve a slash across the last vampire's chest, using my second blade to finish him off with a decapitating swipe. Too easy. Way too easy. My blood was roaring for more violence. I needed to get to Britt, and I needed to punish those that had hurt her. This was nowhere near enough to satisfy my hunger for vengeance. Having disabled the enemies in front of me, I made for the door and tried to blast it open with my powers, using my mind only to push the heavy oak apart. When it didn't budge, I used more power, and that created a humming in the air around me, the air whipping my hair against my skin as it spun in wild currents. Stop. I heard Samuel yell just as the door did burst apart, from the inside out though. The Viking appeared beside me, his huge black blade drawn just as the vile stench of sulfur poured out of the door, along with a mass of writhing black and red scaly bodies, some even burning or breathing fire. I laughed, a grin splitting my face apart. More opponents? Jog Gobel. And easier. Is that each braze a find actions time. Also, cobbing Gasada, nexty Hazantees, and my throat ached from it, while my nostrils burned from the stench. This wasn't the sweet, beautiful human blood, but the vile blood of demons and the sharper blood of shifters. There were vampires who loved this kind of blood, called it more potent, but not me. Sure, I drank from the incredibly strong, powerful blood of Samuel, a Jotun, but he was one of the few I could stand the taste of. There was a lull in the fight. Thornton's men exhausted, the demons nearly all gone, and most of the wolves had scattered. The remaining hostile forces had gathered in and around the house, forming a tight circle, and witches had cast spells to keep us out. It was frustrating, and now that I momentarily had no opponents, I threw back my head to roar in anger. I could care less if that told Thornton how much Brittany meant to me. Anger and rage were a writhing, burning, seething mass inside of me. I couldn't contain it. I had to keep moving. Any progress? Are you getting through their shields? I demanded as I swiveled around to face the crone of the village here. She was a powerful witch, and although I hadn't searched her out before in this life, I knew we'd met on occasion. Her in earlier incarnations of herself, though. She smiled, and her teeth were a little crooked and yellowed. Yes, we're nearly there. Send in the Dracos, my lord. I turned to yell an order at Lysander, but the man was already running forward towards the house, completely forgoing cover. As soon as he had gained enough distance on his allies, he shifted, his body mass exploding outward as he changed from a heavily muscled, tall human to a huge, even heavier muscled, black dragon, his scales glittering like obsidian in the flickering light of a sunset, 3 horns proudly on his forehead to announce to the world that he was not just any dragon, he was royalty. He hit the side of the building with all of his body mass, throwing in over 50 tons of weight. It shook the area with a thundering sound, and I felt a spike of worry. If the building collapsed, Brittany would get caught in it, like a ripple on a pond. Ripples rolled outward from where he'd hit the shield and building. They sparked blue and red and yellow and green. A crackling resounded, and then I knew he'd already done it. The shield was gone. With yells of victory, my Gaishiok, my warriors, and my Dawishuk present surged forward to renew the attack. We had to beat back Thornton and his son Edward thoroughly, or they'd try this all over again soon. I would not rest until I knew Brittany was safe. To one side, the ground split apart, and I knew the demon lord had opened a gateway. More of his minions started pouring into our world, screeching and screaming cries of war and hatred. Most of them small, imps. A lot of them as tall or taller than a human, but only one was as big as Lysander in his dragon form. It was a burning mass of what appeared to be boulders held together by sinewy muscles, no skin whatsoever. The thing barreled into the dragon without pause, and together they tumbled into the building. I screamed in warning, both out loud and mentally, and Lysander scrambled to get up into the air, spreading his large wings shot with silver. However, the damage had been done. Part of the second floor had been torn clean off. Knowing that Lysander would do his best to keep the house intact now that he'd been made aware of the danger, I turned, facing the demon lord that I'd now spotted on the other side of the chasm, running. I was there in a flash, dodging past the lesser demons and imps easily, and hamstringing the occasional creature when it crossed my path. The chasm was about as wide as 6 cars together, and sulfuric smoke was billowing out of it. Hell, as humans often called the demon realm, wasn't actually located below the Earth's surface, but their portals always manifested themselves this way. The demon, Brittany's father, saw me coming and started to spin away, smoke swirling around him as he started to dematerialize. I don't think so. I smirked as I propelled myself across the tear in the earth, landing both my feet solidly in his back. We rolled across the ground together, the demon hissing, I was growling. I didn't care that I sounded much like a rabid dog. I was going to tear his throat out. We both got to our feet and I swung my blades, testing the demon's reflexes. He sprung back to avoid the cold bite of my steel blade and raised both his claw-like hands. Fire streamed out of them and engulfed me whole. Burning and seething and scorching, the demon's eyes gleamed in victory. I laughed, the air crackling as the demon's power collided with mine, splitting as if cut with a knife and billowing around me without touching me, passing me without even harming me or my clothing. Fool, I scoffed. I was born in fire. But I knew that sending him my own flames would be useless. He was as immune to fire as I was, although before demon fire and dragon fire had both been able to harm me. It seemed my powers had evolved yet again. Instead, I attacked him with my swords, slowing my strikes just a tad, enough to make him think I was tired, that I'd slowed after the 2 full hours of combat we'd had. If he believed it, he'd underestimate me, and that would definitely be his ending. The demon had an unusual fighting technique, using his claws and dancing into close range as if not the least bit worried that he'd be injured. With one hand, he grabbed my right sword, yanking hard to wrestle it out of my grip. With the other, he slashed for my throat. I dodged the slash just in time and felt adrenaline shoot through my body. Close call. I knew those nails were highly poisonous. With a growl, I blasted him backwards with pure power, slamming him into a nearby tree. The thing broke with a mighty crack, but the demon flowed to his feet with a grace that told me nothing had been broken. Too bad. We circled each other again, and this time, before he could get in closer, I spun one blade in a high upwards arc again, manifesting a serrated throwing blade a fraction of a second later, and tossing it in a fast, blurring arc at the demon. The next moment, I caught my sword again and launched myself at him before he could react. As I knew he would, he dodged the flying throwing blade, and that spun him sideways, one claw out of range to block both my blades now. I let out a growl in victory as my blade hit home. The first one caught by his right-hand claw, and the other caught with his belly. It sunk into the soft tissue greedily, and then caught against the hard spikes of the demon's spine. The demon hissed and then shuddered, red blazing eyes glazing over slowly as he slid off my blade and fell to the ground. The blackest blood stained the earth dark and was corroding my sword, eating away at the metal. I smiled down at his dying form, a momentary sense of satisfaction rushing through my system, only to disappear when I realized I still hadn't found Brittany, that she could be hurt somewhere. With a frown, I focused on our completed bond and tried again to reach her mentally, hoping that, with the death of her father, I'd be able to reach her. A blank wall forced me back and I threw back my head to growl loudly. Damn it! Where was she? Why couldn't I reach her? Then, before I could move off to the house and tear it apart piece by piece until I had her in my arms again, more demons and imps and wolves and witches appeared and attacked me. I knew my Taoiseach Sakta and other Gaesiak were out there fighting more of them, but where I was the only one. Fighting alone, grinning even though I felt nothing but a horrible need to get to Brit and a terrible vengeance to kill all those that had harmed her. I fell on the new opponents and started tearing them apart, with my blades, my raw power, and even my fangs and bare hands. My gut tightened in anger as I spun around and dispatched of another opponent. Where was that bloody wolf? Where was Thornton or even his son Edward? I needed Brittany, or an opponent that wouldn't die so quickly. Around me I saw that the battlefield, formerly a perfectly maintained and groomed garden, was littered with bodies. Demons and shifters and vampires all piled over each other and scattered about. Jaden was still prowling about, and I could see Seritin flashing around in the shadows, deadly and silent like a viper. I didn't see Samuel anywhere, but I could feel his powers in the air, so I knew he was around somewhere. Throwing back my head, I roared, a challenge to all my opponents. Come out and face me, you cowards. You want my territory? You want my mate? Kill me then. But as I turned and surveyed the area around me, I realized that everyone had fled. At least all the leaders of this bloody attack had. No Thornton or Edward, and even that wolf fort seemed to have disappeared. Well, at least I'd managed to kill the demon. That was a relief for sure. I turned to face the big house and frowned at the complete ruin it had become. Part of the second floor gone, and cracks and tears splitting the building apart. It looked like it had been shaken by a huge earthquake of sorts, and only bits and pieces of it had remained standing. Muted but alive, I could feel the bond between Brittany and me now, although it seemed like it was still impossible to reach her mentally or to locate her. I knew she was breathing, but in pain, and that knowledge made me see red around the edges of my vision. I wanted to kill the demon all over again because I knew he was responsible for her pain, and I wanted to tear Fort to pieces with my bare hands because I knew he'd wanted to put his grimy hands on her again. A flash of light caught my eye, and I let out another growl as I realized it was the beautiful wings of light from Telenextic. How did he get into my territory? Like again. I was about to launch myself up into the air with a leap so I could grab the archangel out of the sky, to hell with the consequences, when I noticed the dark shape in his arms. He was carrying something, no someone, two people even. He was flying away to land out on the road, away from what remained of the battlefield. Near the crone, where she stood with a thoughtful, reverent look on her face, even as she cast spell after spell to contain the raging demon the size of a huge dragon. Lysander had it in a chokehold with both his front claws, and he was biting down on a part that appeared to be the demon's throat. Still, the creature struggled. My legs were already moving, breaking out into a run towards them before I'd even given a conscious command to do so. I urged my body to move faster. Telanixtic had dropped his burden to the hard ground gently. One of the people he'd carried, Jennifer. The partly siren girl, was covered in grime and dust and even blood, and she staggered when the archangel let go of her, dropping to her knees and shaking with tremors that seemed to be part shock and fear and part exhaustion. Still, her eyes went to the other form on the ground, concern creasing a dust-covered forehead. "Is she all right?" Jennifer asked hoarsely. My attention was on Brittany, her leg at an odd angle, and her clothes much in the same disheveled and grime-covered state as those of Jennifer. She was deathly pale, and blood from a gash above her eye had painted the left side of her face completely red. Her chest was heaving as if she was struggling desperately to breathe properly, the sound painful and labored. I was already on my knees beside her, skimming first one hand up her broken leg, barely touching her but blasting her with power to heal and knit the broken bone. As my hand reached her hip, I felt more bruises that I instantly healed. It also seemed as if many of her muscles had suffered from overexertion, as if her entire body had been put under massive strain. I soothed away those aches wherever I found them without pause. Reaching her chest, I felt a sharp pang of worry shot through me. I couldn't find the reason for her labored and painful breathing. There were bruises on her back, and she'd clearly bit her tongue. But other than that, I healed the gash on her face and the concussion her brain had suffered, and only then did I notice the black stain on her throat, spiraling outward and covering a tiny fraction of the mark. I knew it was the word loyalty that had been damaged, stained with that black. What was that? I tried to remove it with my healing power and found that I couldn't. There was something there, something foreign, magic of some sort. The demons. This was the demons doing for sure. Was this the poisonous effect of the demon's nails? I cursed myself for my lack of knowledge. Fear, a tight band around my heart. A different kind of fear. But that was momentarily washed away when my beautiful Brit opened her eyes and smiled. I load it. Alright, now host in Creedinga. I load up Hadexander. I loved up at Axander, my mate and the love of my life. He was glorious in ancient Celtic armor, even with the black and red blood that covered him. His eyes were dark and stormy, worried, but they flashed warmly when he noticed my smile. Hey, I croaked to him, trying to reassure him that I was all right. He'd healed me because there was no longer any pain except the burning in my throat. That was the demons doing, and I wasn't sure what it was, but I knew it wasn't fatal. Sitting up, I swayed a little, and with shock, I realized I still couldn't feel Alexander through our bond. Was that fort blocking it still? Alexander bent down further so he could hold me tightly to his chest, breathing out heavily and then breathing in my scent. I'm so glad you're safe again. So was I, of course. But I still felt restless. It wasn't over yet. Someone was still masking my bond with my mate, and it had to be Fort. Where was that bloody wolf? I pressed myself into Alexander's chest, ignoring the hilt of a dagger digging into my stomach. Over his shoulder, I looked around, scanning my surroundings even though one eye was still closed, the dried blood gluing my eyelid to my cheek. One side of my view was partly obscured by Twanic Stick's imposing wings of light. It was a relief to know that he'd come to my aid. The Archangel was trying to hide his own look of relief, but through our faint connection, I could feel it loud and clear. Next to Ia stood Jennifer, and she looked determined and a whole lot scared, but an ancient-looking, wrinkled woman had clasped a withered hand over her shoulder. I was sure it was the only thing that kept her from bolting. That had to be a witch, and maybe even the crone. She looked wise and omniscient. I think she would have scared me too, if not for that warm look on her face. I could see more of Alexander's people as they made a defensive line around where we stood. Yet it appeared the battle was a moot thing now. Lysander, as a huge dragon, was rounding up the last of Thornton's men and an occasional stray wolf from Fort's pack. It appeared these were offered the chance to surrender. Jaden was also there, but he was hardly visible all the way across the field of destruction. In a flash, I thought I saw Seritin, and a beautiful, imposing woman dressed in leather. Samuel was nowhere to be seen, though, but there was enough familiar faces. The Zawisik were taking care of the last remaining demons with ease. All was well now. See that? I told my brain, yet the uneasy feeling in my gut didn't ease, and neither did the pain in my throat. I killed him, Alexander said, his voice betraying nothing of how he felt about that. It made me realize how much I relied on the bond to read him. How much information usually instinctively seeped through to let me know what went on behind his cool and controlled demeanor. Who? I asked, and my voice was incredibly husky and soft. Everyone heard me, though, and I knew they were all wondering the same. That demon loragramogroi, he replied, and this time I could hear his loathing for the creature clearly. My father was dead? I reached up and touched my throat gingerly. Then why did my throat still hurt? Ram, that's what Stephanie called him, I heard myself say. Surprised, I twisted so I could look my mate in the eye. There was a collective silence behind and around me, interrupted only by a fierce roar from Lysander in the distance. Then there was an orange glow as the remains of the mansion burst into flames. Are you certain you heard that right? That was Twanextic moving in closer. Tension and worry rolling off him in waves, and this time, I think everyone could feel it. Not just me. Alexander's grip around my waist tightened when I nodded slowly. Yes, that's what she said, and he didn't correct her. From somewhere, a handkerchief had been produced, and my mate deftly used it to clean the blood from my face. That means we can't be certain he's dead. Seritin, find me his body. Yes, my lord, the dark man replied softly. I hadn't seen him, but he'd obviously been close by. Alexander pulled me to my feet then and tilted my chin up so he could look at my sore throat. The hissing that escaped him couldn't mean a whole lot of good. Has Samuel been found? I want the cleanup to start now, and as many soldiers as needed return to their posts. The rest remains to guard us here. Scuffling around us, and with my sight restored to both eyes, I could see people around me dart away. The old witchy-looking woman pulled up her sleeves and turned to face the burning house. She was preparing to cast some sort of spell, it seemed, mumbling softly and frowning as if concentrating intently. Telenextic and Alexander were the only ones that didn't move, except for a scattering of warriors painted with blue and ochre around us. Obviously, these were the men remaining as our guard. I wondered who'd been responsible for their colorful appearance. Beside me, Deidre moved into my field of vision, clad in black leather and painted just like the warriors around her. Short swords similar to the ones Alexander carried hung in sheaths at her hips, both blades blackened with blood. Her fiery red hair hung in ringlets about her face. It made her look both soft and fierce at the same time. However, her liquid silver eyes were huge, and her face was as pale as snow. She'd come to fight, but something had shook her to her core. "Raim, you said?" The woman's voice warping the name strangely, as if she was much more aware of the origin of the name and the linguistic cadence that belonged with it. I nodded, my throat burning. "Yes, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Reaching out a trembling hand, she touched my shoulder. A low, rumbling growl made Alexander's chest vibrate against me, but he cut off the aggressive sound abruptly. "Careful, Deidre. I won't be able to control all of my baser instincts right now." She withdrew her hand again, and then leaned heavily on Bob, who'd appeared beside her with an intent look on his face. Raim was the demon that murdered Deidre's family and held her captive before she was made. Shocked, I clutched to Alexander's warmth as I remembered the tragic, horrifying story of the red-headed girl's life. She'd never mentioned the name of the demon when she talked about her past. The demon had come and demanded her hand in marriage. Then, when she and her family had refused, a slaughter had ensued, and Deidre had been the only survivor. She'd told me that she'd often wished she'd died then, along with her family. It was hard to reconcile the thought of the man that had fathered me with this monster, despite the fact that I knew he'd raped my mother and done countless other horrible things. Even despite the fact that he'd hurt me, tortured me almost when I'd been locked up in that basement before. Not to mention what he'd done to Andy. "Andy, where's my brother?" I asked urgently. That demon wasn't after me. He wanted Andy. Alexander picked up on my fear and spun to bark out orders to the remaining guards, no doubt also communicating mentally with his Dawisash. I had Danis bring him to my stronghold. There he is, completely safe. But I knew before he'd said, "if they arrived." "Fort," I said. "He went for Andy. That's why he's not here." Of all the opponents today, he was the one least missed. I heard Stephanie tell him the demon had another job for him. I recalled the momentary distrust and then the slow-forming glee on his face as he realized what Raim wanted him to do. We were all already on our feet and moving, Alexander slinging me up onto his back, Telenextic spreading his wings and launching himself into the sky. Bob and Deidre spun around and became blurs as they ran as fast as they could towards the Clitton residence. Alexander, burdened with me, was only a fraction of a second later as he followed them. We arrived at the house in record time, and it was immediately evident that something had happened. The front door was splintered completely, and there were scorch marks on the lawn as if huge fireballs had struck the ground. Alexander cursed loudly in Gaelic. "Where is Sarah?" Just then, Telenextic landed. "The boy isn't here. I can't feel him." He sounded more worried than I'd ever heard him before, and he wasn't trying to hide that fact at all. As if he'd given in to the more primal urge to protect his offspring. "Over here," Deidre yelled, waving her arm as she pointed to a pile of rubble, something that appeared to be the remnants of a garage. The remains of a car were visible just outside of it, smoking, and the prone body of Sarah lay beside the driver's door. She was unconscious, and a wooden stake had been driven through her belly, silver wires glittering across her throat and wrists, bands with runes of magic that forced her immobile. It was clear she'd tried to struggle free, had tried to remove the stake from her body. Just a few feet away from her lay Danis, also unconscious and bleeding heavily. Blood, a dark, already congealing pool around him. Drag marks made it obvious he'd tried to get to Sarah, despite the bloody lacerations and scorch marks that covered him almost from head to toe. Only when we reached him did I see the true horror of what had been done to him, however. His right arm was completely missing. A shimmering shield in front of the stump told us he'd cast a spell to stop the bleeding, only to succumb to the pain and other injuries just before he could reach Sarah and remove the containment bands. Alexander knelt beside Danis after one look at his sister, but he knew he couldn't undo the magic that held her. so he sent his healing powers through the young witch's ravaged body. Danis actually jolted violently with the force of it. He had no heartbeat, Deidre whispered, her face ashen. Were there no guards left here? There were, but a Galamut was with the raiders. Look at the scorch marks. They were overpowered, Bob exclaimed softly. He was pale too, and his voice sounded strained as his eyes darted from Danis to Sarah and back again. Deidre hissed in shock. Galamut? I didn't know what it was, but the red-headed girl seemed to tremble in absolute terror and fear. If that was the reaction to just a name, this creature had to be just as bad as Ryung was, evil. I swallowed back bile in my throat as my heart convulsed painfully. They obviously hadn't had a chance. Color had returned to Danis's face, if only slightly. Yet in response to that, Sarah started to regain consciousness, her arms weakly struggling against the silver bands and blood bubbling up again around the entry wound of the stake. Tonextic was standing beside her, and with sure hands he pulled out the stake in one quick, fluid motion. She screamed, and her legs twitched wildly for a moment. It was clear that the stake had shattered her spine. Alexander was beside her in a flash, blue fire leaping from his hands even before he reached her. It filled the gaping hole in her middle, knitting flesh back together so rapidly that we could see it move. The fire also licked across the silver bands, and soon they sprung apart like locks that popped open. When that happened, it made the sound of breaking twigs. Immediately, Sarah moaned, Danis? Despair and intense fear covered her face and drenched her voice. He'll live, Alexander barked out as he shifted her to stretch out more comfortably on the ground, his movements jerky and ungraceful for once, yet tender all the same as he stroked his sister's face. I can't feel my legs, she moaned again, in surprise this time. It was clear she'd never experienced anything like this before. At least there was no pain then, and that was a relief. I didn't want to imagine the agony of a stake through your belly. They are healing Deifer Oak. It's all right. My mate was smoothing his hands over her face gently now, reassuring her, while Bob, knelled on her other side, started doing the same, murmuring softly in ancient Gaelic. It looked like something both men had done 1,000 times before when Sarah had been a little child, scared of a nightmare or a shadow beneath her bed. I'm so sorry. Sarah's eyes found me a little away from her, and they were wide and big and full of sorrow, calmer under the gentling touches. They took Andy. Took him. I know, we'll find him. I tried to sound brave, even though I was shaking on the inside, but I knew it would only upset Sarah now if I showed her my own fear. My friend had been through enough for now, so I'd lock the panic up inside me until I could be alone. No, they're going to kill him. I'm so sorry, please forgive me. She then started wailing, as if in intense mental pain, tears rolling down her ash-stained cheeks as if she was already mourning for my brother. You fought to protect him the best you could. You nearly died. Danis nearly died. What more could you have done? I said, yet the despair I was feeling myself made my voice sound shrill and my words were laced with fear. Sarah didn't reply but kept wailing in agony even though the stake wound in her middle had nearly closed by now. Alexander wiped his hand over her face in a quick but practiced gesture, and she fell quiet immediately, fast asleep. With a grim look on his face, my mate turned around and gathered me in his arms. We will find him, Britt. I won't let the demon hurt Andy. I allowed myself a moment to rest in his arms. Then I turned to survey the damage to the house and the area, hoping there would be traces, clues as to where they'd taken my baby brother. All I saw, however, was Danis's still limp body with his arm missing, and I could no longer keep my feelings inside, tears burning their way up my throat and forcing their way out from beneath my no-clenched shut eyelids. Please, somebody help him? I heard myself whisper, and in reply to that, I heard only the whispering of a set of wings as Alexander tightened his grip around me. Blackness engulfed me, and the last I heard was the lullaby that had rocked me to sleep so many times now. He'd used his power to make me sleep. I felt a momentary surge of both anger and gratefulness. How could he do this when Andy was missing, when my friends needed help? Yet the blackness that engulfed me made me forget, if just for a little while. I woke to the sound of pacing footsteps, but they were distant, and when I slowly opened my eyes, I knew immediately that I was alone. I was lying in a very big, soft bed, surrounded by a very familiar smell. It made me feel safe. Then I frowned, unable to sense Alexander. Someone was still shielding me. blocking me from sensing the people I'd by now become so familiar with, finding comfort in the tenuous connections between our minds. Even my bond with Talan Extic was now shielded. I could tell the bonds were there though, unlike before. Whoever was doing this had stopped hiding it from me, using the energy instead to make the shield stronger. I tried in vain to find my way around it, anxious to see if I could reach Andy. Was it Fort? And was he really that powerful? In moments, the rest of my memories came rushing back, and I was overwhelmed by a sense of despair. Andy gone, 2 of my best friends gravely injured, and more of Alexander's people dead. How had this been allowed to happen? How was this even possible? Did Alexander really leave Andy so unprotected? With only a handful of warriors, and Sarah, who wasn't the strongest fighter, and Danis, a witch more capable of teleportation than combat. Anger surged through me at that thought. Could he really have been so stupid? Sitting up, I became aware of the pain in my throat. A moment long, the room spun around me. Then I managed to focus, and I realized I didn't know where I was. This was not our bedroom, yet it was clearly Alexander's. It was visible in the choice of furniture and the energy of the room. The colors chosen for the walls could only remind me of him, and his scent clung to the sheets around me. Whoever was pacing outside the room, however, hadn't stopped doing so, but hadn't come in either. Did that mean they were unaware that I woke up? Or was it Alexander? I stiffly climbed out of the bed and threw open the old, heavy wardrobe situated in the corner. It was filled with my own clothes. Someone had taken the care to fold and hang them in neat order. Clearly, we would be staying here now on a more permanent basis. I didn't have to guess to know that these were Alexander's rooms in his so-called stronghold. I quickly selected a pair of practical jeans and a long-sleeve shirt in a dark, warm brown color that matched my eyes. Getting dressed and washed in the ensuite bathroom, I was in a hurry, anxious to get started on the search for Andy. It was the only thing on my mind now. There wasn't even place to worry about poor Danis's arm. I was sure that Alexander was also focused with single-minded determination on finding him. In fact, he'd probably blame himself for it in the first place. I wanted to go to him and at least reassure him that I knew it wasn't his fault yet. Somewhere I wasn't sure. If he really hadn't left enough people to guard Andy, we'd both known that it was something in Andy, a talent that the demon desired. I was just making my way to the door, ready to barge down whoever was pacing in front of it and force my way into the search. A sharp pain shot through my body, radiating out from my heart. For a moment, I thought I was having a heart attack. Then the pain subsided and I became aware of another sensation. How did this happen? Only one thing came to mind. Fort. It was him that had taken Andy, and it was him that shielded me from the others. I could suddenly feel the simmering anger that had followed the pain, beating and pulsing through my head. I wasn't sure if that was supposed to happen, but it had drawn my attention to the thin but tenuous line between my mind and his. He'd somehow been injured. It had been his heart hurting, as if being squeezed by an unseen force. It was his anger filling me now, and I trembled with the intensity of it. Of course we had to be connected somehow, if he were to shield me. A faint hope bloomed inside of me, but I was careful to keep it hidden in a corner of my own mind, drawing up those thick metal walls around it and my thoughts. The same ones I'd once tried on Alexander, but that had given me a headache at the time. Now I felt no pain, and the walls slid into place easily. It wasn't hard even to put up some token, distraction thoughts and feelings on the outside, in case Fort was in fact able to see inside my head through that connection. I didn't want to tip him off. He'd been injured, or at least hurt, or I wouldn't have felt that, so something had happened. For a moment, I hoped it had been Alexander freeing Andy, but then I realized that was foolish. Alexander wouldn't leave Fort alive. I sat down on the bed again, certain I could find out where they were somehow. Closing my eyes, I searched carefully from behind the safety of the freshly made walls, and soon I'd found what I was looking for. There, the connection. Faint and small, concealed and camouflaged, but definitely there. Once I'd found it, it wasn't difficult to follow. I felt like a bloodhound on a trail as I raced along the thin line of energy, jumping from mind to mind almost, as if he'd tried very hard to hide his trail. It was red hot to me though, glowing and alive and so clear now that the image of it seemed burned into my memory. It was seething in red, anger and pain. Whoever had hurt Fort had made finding him easy. Then I hit a wall, shielded like my own mind had carefully been, Fort's mind. I couldn't see into his head, didn't even know how to exactly. I'd never done anything like this before, and I'd certainly never heard anyone talk in detail about it either. I circled the shields. It wasn't really circling because there was no clear mental picture of the shape and size of it yet. It felt like I was walking around the edges of his mind, making several loops to make certain I didn't miss a thing. There were no cracks and fissures. I didn't give up though, but tried again and again to find a weakness, a glimpse, anything. Suddenly the walls flashed red, then that same pain from before seemed to crush my heart again. I felt my body crumble onto the bed, but at the same time the walls of Fort's mind flickered. I had no time to hesitate, and, through the red haze of pain, I hurriedly slipped through. Immediately, vision, not my own, assaulted me, and the pain seemed to intensify tenfold. It was painful to move, to breath, and even to think. I was looking at a hardwood floor covered with dirt, and I was leaning on my hands, panting out breaths between clenched teeth. They were big hands, male hands, and I knew instantly that they were Fort's. My vision swam and my ears were ringing. The pain was only getting worse, and it was so very hard to focus. I heard myself curse in Fort's voice. "You little son of a bitch. Cut that out." My head tilted upwards to show me the image of a rusty cage, big enough to hold a decent-sized dog or a small child. Andy, dirt-streaked and scared, his chubby face tear-stained, looked out at me. It was clear he was in intense pain, yet he also looked extremely focused. I wanted to scan him for injuries, but my vision moved again. I was getting to my feet now, and the pain was, although still intense, slowly subsiding. Standing up was still a task, and I stumbled multiple times as I made my way towards the door, swerving as if I was drunk. "It's that Rain wants you alive," I grated out, "or I'd have long since killed you. Spoiled brat." With those parting words, I swung open the door and stepped outside. As it banged shut behind me, I breathed in deeply. Immediately the pain abated, slowly fading away, and this time, it seemed without leaving that red-hot trace behind. No burning in my veins that made moving an agony, or breathing a task. For a fraction of a second, I was still Fort, staring out across a forest, within the distance the village of Riverwood, home to Westtown High and the Clitton residents. Then my mind was disconnected, and I was myself again, rapidly being pulled away and shut out by the shields that were slamming into place around Fort's mind. Where were they? I hadn't been able to see enough landmarks to know in which direction around the village the cabin had been located. The knowledge surfaced, like before when I searched the minds of the dead bodies of that crony, of Thornton, and the mind of Chumali. A cottage, built on a rocky outcrop with a single access road. Fort knew the forest so well that he needed no roads to escape if necessary. In the forest, he'd be anything but trapped. I slammed into my own body with such force that for a moment every single nerve ending seemed to scream with awareness. Then my throat burned so violently that my stomach rebelled. I tumbled out of the bed, but hadn't staggered more than 2 steps towards the bathroom when I gagged. My knees gave way and I crashed to the floor, puking and gagging until my body heaved over and over again, yet nothing came. My midriff was so cramped up that the pain, although located differently, almost came close to the heart attack feeling of before. The room was spinning around me so rapidly that I feared I'd get dizzy from it and start throwing up all over again. My forehead was touched with something cool, a wet washcloth, and I felt a big male hand running up and down my back in a soothing manner. For a moment I thought it was Alexander, but as I blinked and looked up through eyes, blurry with tears, I came face to face with Lysander. I nearly screamed in surprise, but only a shocked gasp escaped my laboring throat. His ever so aristocratic face had been softened by compassion now, and it made for a weird combination. This man was anything but Compassio Alex as far as I'd been aware. But it seemed I had been wrong. He held the washcloth in slender fingers and without hesitation wiped my mouth with it, dabbing until he was certain I was clean. Then the cloth simply disappeared, and so did the evidence of my upset stomach, not even leaving a stain on the pristine cream-colored carpet. The next second he held a crystal-clear glass filled to the brim with sparkling water, offering it to me so I could wash the foul taste from my mouth. I swallowed greedily and was just about to offer him my thanks when it hit me. The name of the rocky outcrop the cottage had been built on, Shadow Peak. I did croquet. I was hired into the 6% of crop, which I did the step and was make it out a 6. Thankfully, Lysander seemed to understand what I wanted and grabbed my elbow to steer me in the right direction. He walked so fast that I nearly had to run to keep up with him. But not once did I ask him to slow down for me. Although I'd never been here before, I hardly paid any attention to the new surroundings. They were a vague blur. I was sure the decorations were as exquisite as the ones in the house in Riverwood, yet they were completely lost on me right now. Then 2 big wooden doors appeared in front of me and they slammed open by an unseen force, banging loudly against the walls. Inside, I found Alexander pacing a groove into the floor and Saratin talking to him in an unfamiliar language. The words a long stream that seemed to have no spaces or ends. My mate seemed to understand and barked back orders in Gaelic, his voice harsher than I'd ever heard him before. Not even when that vampire had once nearly bitten me, the incident now seemed like ages ago. As Alexander turned on the spot furthest away from me and started pacing back the way he'd come, he spotted me. In a flash, he was next to me, gathering me in his arms and crushing me to his strong chest with arms like bands of iron. "Oh, Britt," he groaned, and I didn't even need our bond to sense the pain, guilt, and despair. He was desperate and scared, and it made fear a live thing skittering around inside my gut. "Shadow Peak," I said into his chest, my voice slightly muffled but still clear to everyone present. "That's where Andy is right now." For a moment there was silence. Then Alexander asked, "You are certain? How do you know?" He sounded incredibly hopeful now, but over his shoulder I got, "See Saratin," a disbelieving look on his features. "Fort is still shielding me, suppressing our bond." I followed him back to his mind and gleaned the information from him. I explained. He was in extreme pain at the time. It left him vulnerable. Surprisingly, Lysander added, "It's true, I could feel the mind surge through the door." He passed me a look that told me he knew I'd been in great pain too, but he didn't mention it. For a moment there, I thought there was even a flicker of respect in those black eyes of his. Alexander let go of me and stepped back, then hurriedly slipped his weapons back into their sheaths. He was still wearing the exact same armor from before. In fact, he was still covered in the blood and grime and blue paint. Clearly, he hadn't taken a single moment since to freshen up. "Saratin, gather a force and meet me there." He swung around to Lysander. "You stay here and guard Brittany." He was out the door before anyone could utter a word. Yet in passing me, he brushed his fingers softly across my cheek. Then it sunk in that he wasn't taking me, that he'd left me here while he risked his life all alone to save Andy. "Damn it," I exclaimed angrily, whirling around. I punched the desk with my fist, surprised when a dent actually formed in the hard wood and drinking in the sharp pain that shot up my arm. Saratin just bowed to me once, and then also left the room, moving off to gather a backup force for Alexander. I had to go with them. I had to. It was my only chance to help free Andy. He'd be terrified all alone and wasn't going to sit still and do nothing. I stopped Saratin by calling out his name, and he froze in his tracks. "Take me with you when you leave to join Alexander." The dark man seemed to consider this for a moment, but then slowly shook his head. "No, he wants you to stay here. He only said Lysander had to protect me." I argued, but the scarred warrior shook his head again and left without another word. Another curse escaped me as I turned to look at my guard, the dragon that I knew had come to my rescue when I'd been captured, yet that seemed to have despised me from the start, simply because I was human. The Greek man raised his hands defensively and said, "Oh no, Brittany. He told me to stay hurry and protect you. I'm not taking you anywhere. Alex would have my skin if you got hurt. Andy will need me." I tried to reason with him, but I knew it was useless. So, I changed tack. "How are Sarah and Dennis doing?" Lysander looked relieved by my question and answered in a rush. "Sarah is fine. She's working hard on repairs and healing in the Inframanda. She's unable to sit still and watch Tonextic work on Dennis's arm." He paused and then added, "Lenextic says he can't give him back his old arm, but with time he'll be able to make a proper prosthesis." Feeling a momentary stab of guilt about the injuries and the pain many had to endure, including my friends for my sake and that of Andy, I knew it was inevitable that this was the way things went when others jockey for power, like Thornton and his son and the demon Rame. I gently asked him how many had been injured or killed in the past fights. The question made Lysander frown. All the warriors that remained with Andy have been killed, and 2 at the house at which you were held." There was a pause before he added ever so softly, "One that died for Andy was a cousin of mine. Also a dragon, although not Dracos. Alexander did not leave your brother without proper protection. Danis was supposed to teleport the boy here, the stronghold, but a spell prevented them from doing so and cut them off from the outside world." That was one of the longest things I'd ever heard him say, and a sudden spike of warmth suffused me for the regal Dracos. He'd been an ass before, but he was trying hard to be nice now, and he even seemed somewhat on my side, showing a sense of empathy and insight. It had been clear from the moment he'd showed up at my side after I woke up that he'd been trying to help, bringing me towards Alexander without my asking and backing me up when it seemed for a moment they didn't believe me when I explained how I'd gotten the information. Reaching up, I softly stroked his slightly stubbled cheek, remembering that shifters were very tactile creatures. For a moment, his eyelids closed, creating black crescents on his cheeks with their long, dark lashes. "You're a good man, Lysander," I whispered softly. His lips quirked, and then he smiled gently. "I'll take you to see Danis, Mrs. Clitton." A smirk told me he was teasing, and then he took hold of my elbow and dragged me through the building. A plan was slowly forming in my head at the same time. If only I knew for certain it would work, yet too much still depended on variables I couldn't account for. Lysander soon paused in front of a door and knocked softly. There was no reply yet. He swung open the door anyway. It was very dark in the room, except for a candle burning beside a bed. There were no windows. Danis was lying on the bed, looking like a smug, spoiled prince enthroned on pillows and covered beneath blankets. Food piled up on a platter beside him and just in reach of his hand. He smiled the moment he saw me, but I could tell he was in great pain. The real light came from Telenextic, however. The archangel stood beside Danis, his hands hovering above the space where the witch's arm should have been. A golden shimmering was visible beneath his hands. His wings he'd spread out behind him like a great wall of light, the single candle in the room turning his wings the color of dawn. It was a stunning sight, and it had to be even more impressive from where Danis was sitting. He was nearly surrounded by the light. "Brittany," Danis exclaimed. He sounded cheerful, but I could tell it was forced. Telenextic gave no sign that he'd seen us, remaining utterly focused on what he was doing. Then the witch, having found his voice, yelled, "God damn it! That hurts." Telenextic's face remained impassive, but then the golden shimmer disappeared and he folded his hands together. "I think I have all the measurements and information I need now." Danis shifted his body around on the pillows and said, very fervently, "Thank the heavens. Seritin informed me that you found the location of my grandson," the archangel stated, while folding his wings tightly along his body. For a moment, I saw a flash again of Telenextic strapped down to that black granite pole and naked, his wings cut from his body, and the white feathers a bloody mass scattered around him. Then the image was gone again, and I focused on his words, anxiously nodding. "Yes, Alexander went off half-cocked on his own to save him. I knew I would have done the same had I been able to. Yet now it seemed like a very foolish move. I didn't know if Fort was there alone with Andy, or if there was more troops waiting outside. I had to get there, and quick. Was Alexander already there now? Fighting? Bleeding? Injured, or maybe victorious? Did he have someone else who could teleport him, or did he have to run there? Their drive? How far was the stronghold even from Riverwood? I knew the at-will teleportation, the way Danis could, was an extremely rare talent. One that occurred in maybe 1 or 2 witches per generation on the entire world. It was unlike that there was another teleporter at Alexander's disposal, especially since I knew that Thornton had one in his service. "How are you feeling, Danis?" I asked, reaching out to touch his leg. He pulled a face and then said, "I'd be fine if not for those measurements for the prothesis." He cast a careful, guarded look towards my grandfather, clearly intimidated. It drove Sarah insane, so I sent her away to do something to distract her. He straightened his shoulders, and this time it was a slightly accusing, dark look. He cast the archangel, as if he blamed him for this. "Sarah is all right?" I asked, remembering only too clearly the horrible state she'd been in. The stake piercing her torso and the silver netting, cutting and burning across her body. That gaping hole when Telenextic pulled out the stake, I felt so incredibly bad for the suffering my friends had to endure. I didn't think I'd ever be able to repay them for this. The knowledge that Sarah had even asked me for my forgiveness for failing. I shivered at the thought. She had nothing to apologize for. It was me that should be apologizing for bringing this danger to her and her mate. Danis smiled a genuine smile, unaware of my inner turmoil. Oh yes. She was beyond furious that Alex wouldn't let her out to help search with the others. I nodded. I heard she was helping in the inn for Amanda now. Yes, she's trying to stay busy. A frown. I just don't understand how Fort can do all this. He never used to be this powerful despite his alpha lineage. Casting a look at Telenekstik, who was running his eyes up and down my body as if to ensure himself I was unharmed, and Lysander, who was guarding the door. I explained my theory about this. The demon, Raim, can take powers, right? I noted that they were all three listening intently to me now. I think he can also give them away again. Probably only temporarily, though. I doubt he'd be willing to part with power on a permanent basis. I paused before continuing. Fort mind controlled me to get into the car. Yet since then, he hasn't done anything like this again. Plus, if he'd been able to do this before, no doubt he would have used it when he tried to rape me. At my words, an angry hiss escaped from Lysander's throat. I wasn't sure, but it seemed to me Telenekstik tensed as well. With my fragile connection to him shielded, I had no way of telling. Same goes for the shielding he's using to mute my bond with Alexander. I don't think he has complete control over this talent. Or, I wouldn't have been able to slip in when he was in pain. The shields were something he had to consciously think off to do. I looked around at the others in the room, trying to convey the urgency of my next words. We have to get Alexander help as soon as possible. There is no way of knowing just how powerful Fort is right now. Damn, was all Danis said as he sifted around again, clearly feeling uncomfortable although he was no longer in pain. The silence stretched for a moment, and then Telenekstik shrugged as if he could care less. Boy, you can teleport. You can even take someone with you. Was that my imagination, or did his eyes really darted to me briefly when he said, someone? But don't even think about fighting or leaving this bed. The warning was a fierce one, and after a dramatic pause in which he fixed Danis with a dark look, he turned to me. Take care, my little Gelatli, he said, stroking my cheek with gentle, elegant fingers. I felt a wave of heat wash over me, and I was instantly rejuvenated by it, feeling stronger and more alive and aware than I had before. Even the burning in my throat seemed to subside for a moment, although it had been a constant factor ever since the injury had been inflicted on me. Lysander hissed again. What did you do? He'd stepped in closer to me, so he was close enough to brush my back with his shoulder. Telenekstik only pinned him with a very frosty look. I'm lending my granddaughter some power. Dracos. He let go off me then and stepped closer to the shapeshifter. Thank you, Ia, I said, hoping to diffuse the situation. It was in vain, it seemed. A word, the archangel said, no inflection whatsoever to his voice. Lysander allowed himself to be pulled away, walking along with my grandfather towards the door. His back now turned to me and Danis. I cast a look at the witch, my eyes automatically shifting towards the heavy candlestick that held the single candle that burned to ease the darkness. Turning back, I saw Telenekstik stepping out of the room, Lysander standing in the door opening with his back still towards me. I hardly thought about what I was about to do, simply leaping across the room to snatch up the candlestick. Danis gasped in shock as I darted towards the Dracos, my improvised weapon raised high like a club and the room flickering as the burning candle fell to the floor. I swung it full force, not holding back one bit. I knew that if I didn't use all my strength, I might never knock him out. Besides, the one hit would not kill a dragon. His skull had to be a lot stronger and thicker than that of a human. I just hoped it would knock him out long enough for me to get a head start to get to Alexander and save Andy. Or, they'd surely get me and lock me up in here somewhere. Lysander was just turning and closing the door as I screamed, "Forgive me." That's when the candlestick connected to the side of his head, and the candle hit the floor, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment I could still see clearly. Shock and bewilderment flashed across his features, and then he slowly started falling sideways. Then the light gone, all I saw was the slightly open door, a sliver of brilliant light falling through it. Lysander hit the floor with a loud, heavy thud, and I could hear him exclaim something even as he lost consciousness. What the? Eyes rolling back into his head, the white of it reflecting the light from the hallway, he passed out. Fuck, Danis finished lamely, light at that instant jumping to life around the room, obviously a spell he'd cast. Through the door, still opened a crack, I saw one topaz-colored eye and half a smirk. Talanixtic's voice drifted through with a little humor in it. I'll pretend I didn't see that. Now hurry and help Andy. With a nod, he closed the door, and I spun around to look at Danis. You need to teleport me to Shadow Peak near Riverwood. Do you know where it is? He was staring at Lysander's prone form on the floor, though, with his mouth hanging open. I cast the dragon a look and realized I'd managed to trap him between forms again. All visible skin covered with black shiny scales, his hair gone to make place for silver and black ridges and horns, while his body was bending and warping, but not really growing to accommodate for his dragon size. Danis, can you? I stepped up next to the bed beside him and grabbed his remaining hand. You will need to teleport back here as soon as possible and get Lysander help, I said, for both Lysander's benefit and Danis's. I didn't want him to stay to help me and run the risk of getting hurt. Again. Shadow Peak? Was all he asked for confirmation. My car came slipping and sliding to a stop in front of Galen's house, the gravel crunching loudly under the tires and a dust cloud thick enough to hide the forest behind me. I think I made enough noise to scare of the entire forest animal population. I didn't care. On the porch of the old, cozy-looking cottage, with its petunias and other splashes of colorful flowers surrounding the place, stood a very old witch. This was Galen. Although retired, he was the nearest alive teleporter that I knew of. When he was younger, he'd been a dedicated and Passio Alex warrior and even friend. Now he was old and crippled, one eye a milky white, blinded by age. The other eye, a sharp blue that always gave me the feeling he saw right through me. That was the trouble with witches. You never knew if they truly did or did not. Their magic often so different now, a days from mine, that I couldn't always sense it. It was worse for many others because in my veins ran the blood of witches. I had always been able to sense more than most. Galen had always been the one capable of cooling me down when I needed it. Not today, though. There was no way anyone could talk me out of rushing to free Andy. There was too many risks in leaving the boy in enemy hands any longer. At any given time, the demon could show up and kill him, devouring his talents and powers. That was an unforgivable and unacceptable thing. I would not allow it. Today, all I needed from Galen was a single teleport, a one-way trip to Shadow Peak. My only objective was to get to Andy and teleport him to the stronghold myself. My teleportation powers were extremely limited, but Andy was small. It would have to be enough. I would not jeopardize Danis again. Not when my sister would stand to lose so much with his death. Already the loss of his limb weighed heavily on my conscience. He had to recuperate first. I couldn't allow him to die from exhaustion from teleporting people because he wasn't fully healed. Jumping out of the car, I rushed up the porch, but all Galen said was, "Where to my friend?" Lifting one bony hand so I could grab it. For once, he didn't spend time persuading me to do something else. Something more rational. Shadow Peak? Ash, Scadow Peak. Igers. The world around me solidified into trees and rocks, a blue sky overhead, and the scent and sound of the forest in the air. I breathed in deeply, filtering the air to pick up the scent of either Fort or Andy. Behind me, Galen called out gently, "Alex, it's not your fault. You left behind a dragon to protect a boy that wasn't even supposed to stay there. You couldn't have known that one of the Galamut had been freed." I whirled around to face Galen. I failed, Gale. 7 men lost their lives. My sister's mate lost an arm. Andy was taken. I felt my blood boil at the thought of my own stupidity. I'd allowed myself to be tricked with my blind rage towards Brittany's kidnapping. It was unforgivable. As if he knew my thoughts, Galen echoed, "Don't go in there blindly again. You do not know what is waiting for you." The nearly blind witch nodded towards the high rock outcrop looming above us. Somewhere on top of that rock stood an old and abandoned cottage, and in it was a cage with Andy. It was well possible that the demon was there too. Ryum, was he already preparing Andy to take his life and his power? "I have to try," I said as I cast a look at my old friend. "Seratin is coming with backup soon." I started at a lope towards the rock face, thinking to scale it with ease and hopefully surprise the wolf. It appeared I'd be downwind from this angle. Seritin and your troops have no teleporters. They will be too late. I heard from behind me, but I ignored his warning. I knew they'd be much too late if things went wrong. Yet I didn't know where or in which state Ryum was. At the worst, he was already there. He'd have to go over my dead body before he harmed Andy. I cast one look up at the looming rocks above me, then easily jumped for the nearest ledge and started scaling them, reaching the top in no time, making light work of the rocks and jumps and ledges. I waited there, not flipping over the edge before I knew what was waiting for me out there. Suspended in the air, hanging from my arms from the edge, I allowed my senses to expand and my breathing to ease. Listening, smelling, and feeling, I took my time to canvass the rock outcrops stretching out before and above me, yet all was quiet. So quiet, in fact, that for a moment I feared Brittany had been wrong about the location. That's when I heard the distinct, slightly too slow heartbeat and even breathing I had learned to recognize as Andy's. It had to be a trap. I knew it, but I had no way to avoid it. I just had to let it spring close around me and hope that being aware would be enough, that it would give me just the edge I needed to survive and bring Andy home. Ryum had no heartbeat that I could hear, which meant he could be there with Andy right now while I waited here. Yet it was comforting to hear that Andy's heartbeat was even and slow. Not too slow for him yet, slow enough to indicate that he wasn't terrified. I spent more precious seconds hanging from my arms like a fly on the wall, just below the edge. Brittany had said that she'd been able to trace Fort only because he'd been in severe pain. I could only assume this meant someone more powerful was present. The question was, who? Certain I would get no wiser from hanging there, I'd pulled myself up so I could look out across the plateau. It was larger than I expected it to be, with the cottage almost 300 feet high, back from the edge and fir trees and boulders scattered about. There was no living soul in sight, but still I was careful when I pulled myself up and onto the plateau completely. It was a good thing too. I'd only barely set foot onto the solid ground when blue exploded all around me. The freezing cold yet burning at the same time kind of blue that indicated a frost demon or water demon of some sort. A solid kick which seemed to come out of nowhere landed on my chest a fraction of a second later. It knocked the air right out of me and sent me flying over the edge. Only because I'd been prepared did I manage to respond appropriately, drawing both my blades as I flew backwards and upwards into the sky. Then, just as I started falling down, I used my power to fling myself back onto my opponent, fire trailing in my wake. On the plateau stood something akin to a human, tall and graceful and distinctly feminine with curves and flowing lines. A white, wispy dress flowing around her long limbs in the air currents around her, while hair, the color of polished sapphire, whirled around her. Her skin was a chalky white, and although her face was strikingly attractive in a surreal way, it displayed horns, proudly standing on her forehead like a crown. At the sight of her, my belly chilled. A frost Galamet. 2 Galamet on free foot? This was terrifying news. I had to destroy this one. Yet, I was not certain that I could. Had it been the same Galamet that had attacked the house in Riverwood and taken Andy, I wouldn't have been worried. He was a fire demon and I was immune to his powers. This one was frost and water. It meant I had to use talents hardly developed, the power's weakest. She was laughing evilly, as if she knew just what I'd been thinking. My attack was slow and I knew this. Coming in from so high, she had plenty of time to consider what to do. I was only a few feet away when she raised her hands towards me. The wrists pressed together and her hands opened, something blue gathering in between her palms. It seemed like slow motion as I neared her and the beam of ice shot up towards me. I dropped like a brick, with the grace of 1-2, rolling to avoid the shards of ice. With my blades, I slashed at her legs and upward to her torso. They met only thin air, the Galamet vaporizing and blowing away on an air current, disappearing like a fata morgana. I growled in frustration, knowing that the longer I fought, the bigger the chance was that Andy was moved or killed. Spinning around, I searched for my opponent, but she was invisible, waiting for me to be less alert. My senses were straining to find her or the wolf that I knew had to be here somewhere. I'd caught his scent, although it was faint. My mind scrambling around to remember all that I knew about the powerful Galamet. Demons so strong and so evil that they had been captured and put under an ancient spell. one that kept them from acting on their free will, sealed them away deep beneath the ground. There had been many Galamut at that time, and they had reigned the demon realm and nearly this realm too, with blood and terror. It was only because they'd fought amongst themselves, jockeying for more power, that the other powers to be had managed to do this. My eyes darted around the rocky outcrop, searching each of the possible hiding places. Behind boulders, trees, and inside the lengthening shadows, amulets had been forged afterwards for each one that would allow the wearer to command them to do their bidding. Something the original capturers of the Galamut had never intended. Something done by darker minds, other demons craving power and not beneath, using the now contained power of the Galamut. Searching was in vain because the ice Galamut had remained invisible. I was certain that she could remain that way indefinitely, and I had to lure her into the visible spectrum, and especially the physical spectrum, if I wanted to do her any harm. I surveyed the area slowly one last time, using all my senses as I started towards the cottage in the distance. I couldn't let the fight get too close to it, endangering Andy. But if Raheem was nearby, I had to find out, and if he wasn't, then the Galamut wouldn't want to risk Andy getting hurt either. My footsteps crunched on the gravelly surface, hardly loud enough for human ears. But I knew that to the Galamut and the wolf it would be more than loud enough. They both had me in their sights anyway, probably. At least now I knew why Brittany had managed to trace Fort. Obviously, it had been the Galamut hurting Fort, and poor Andy had been forced to endure it too, with his strongly developed sense of empathy. I was only 100 feet away from the derelict cottage when I felt a sudden chill in the air. It was the only warning I got. Reflexes kicking in, I launched myself upwards, ice blasting through the space I'd occupied only moments before. Steam rose into the air as the ice melted in the heat of my fire trail. I had to get a rein on that. I couldn't just expend energy that way because I was furious. It was never good to fight with a head filled with anger. I spun around in the air, allowing my blades to heat up and glow red as I located the source of the beam of ice. I knew the Galamut had already moved. Maybe she was even nearly on me, and I hoped the heat of my weapons would keep her away, forcing her to use ranged weapons instead. I landed on the same spot I'd vacated moments before, in a puddle of water. I threw one sword at the spot the Galamut had been in when shooting her shards of ice at me. I knew she wasn't there any longer, but I was certain it would draw her out. As soon as the blade left my hand, I felt the air around me chill again. This time it was already at my back, touching me. An arm appeared around my chest, curling up almost like a lover's embrace while a second hand smoothed across my throat. I felt the firmness of a body against me, the soft female curves hardened by the bite of frost. Air misted around my face as the Galamut breathed out and laughed huskily. So this is the stuff a Regis is made off nowadays? The sound was mocking as one hand slid lower, towards my privates, nails scratching across the bare skin of my chest, still bloody from the previous fight. Her other hand convulsed around my throat. So this is the stuff a Galamut is made off? I replied, mocking her words even as I pushed on my dagger, the one I'd drawn the second after I'd thrown my sword. I heard an intake of breath, and then she laughed again. You're a naughty boy. Sk. The air around me chilled again, and I knew she was going to vaporize into thin air once more. I pushed the dagger home, into the soft flesh of her belly. At the same moment she shot shards of ice into my throat. With a strange sense of detachment, I could feel each of the separate shards cut through flesh, like needles. Ravaging and tearing, arteries ripping apart, the vulnerable flesh of my throat yielding only too easily. Blood gurgled and bubbled in my windpipe, blocking air and gushing down across my chest. For the first time that day, staining my skin a crimson red with my own life's essence. The shards melted, and as they did, my body started regenerating, knitting the skin back together and mending veins and tendons. I'd been forced to my knees, but as I looked up through heavy eyes, I saw the Galamut not too far from me, also clutching hands to a tear in her gut that spilled entrails out onto the cold rocks. She was laughing, a deranged sound that sent chills down my back. Oh yeah, she was one evil, sick creature all right, reveling in the pain as she did, regenerating almost faster than I could myself with no apparent loss of power. I could feel the drain on my own reserves already. Of course I'd been fighting for hours on end yesterday and had not rested since. The white, wispy dress she wore was now stained a strange aqua color at the front. The blood of this frost, Demon, nothing like that of a humanoid. You shouldn't have done that, boy, the woman said, her voice almost sing-song as she looked at me with clear intelligence and mirth in her eyes. Raising a hand, also blue with her blood, she smirked at me. I had only a fraction of a second to dodge, instincts honed with time, my savior. The shards of frozen ice she propelled at me 1,000 times more deadly than a bullet. Still, a searing pain shot through my shoulder where some of the fragments hit, the affected arm just a little too slow to catch my weight as I rolled. Still, I raised my other hand to blast her with sheer telekinetic force. I had to damage her more permanently so she couldn't go invisible again. She slammed back with enough force to crush a human ribcage and tear internal organs, hitting one of the larger boulders with a resounding bang. Cracks appearing across the stone surface, and dust wafting up from it. The frost gallimate didn't move, and I took the time to assess the damage to my own body. The pain in my shoulder was fading, but a lot worse than the shards that had hit my throat before. This was her blood she'd used. It could be toxic, or at least it appeared to be acidic. These shards didn't melt as I healed. Instead, my body forced them out as the wound regenerated. They tinkled, and then shattered as they fell from my shoulder to the ground like crystals of pale glasswood. The sound was loud in the silence, only a steadily rising wind howling across the shadow peak. Standing up, I slowly walked towards the unmoving Gallimut. Not once believing her to be dead, it had been way too easy. I was nearly at her body, watching the ice crystals slowly crawl across the shattered boulder beneath her. Still, she didn't move, no sign of breathing. Gripping my blade tightly in my hand, I raised her body slowly up from the boulder, using my mind only, certain that touching her would make her spring her trap. 2 big chunks of stone followed her up in the air. I'd crush her skull and tear her heart out. Only then would I be sure she was well and truly dead. As she floated before me, her eyes, glowing an evil blue, met mine. She was smiling again, showing off a disturbing set of pointed teeth and an otherwise human-looking mouth. You are too late, and now you will die, she murmured. Anger and grief spiked hot through my blood. You lie. The growl erupted from my throat as I swung my blade, aimed to pierce her heart. The rocks gaining speed and hurling forward to collide with her head. 1 second she seemed doomed to die. The next she exploded into a million icy spikes, much like a hedgehog. The stones fragmenting and my sword bouncing off and catapulting from my hand as if I'd struck diamond. The spikes were still shooting outwards, and I had to summon my powers to form a shield around me. Fire my defense as it billowed up from beneath my feet. Still the spikes advanced, so fast that I hardly saw them move. One pierced my left leg, another my right shoulder, and a third managed to scrape across my cheek. I'd have been dead if not for the shield that had melted the other advancing blades. That's when my back collided with the ground. I was trapped, pinned to the rock by the ice. A blinding light, and then I heard the same tinkling noise as the ice everywhere shattered and collapsed. The next instant, a strong wind blew across the rocks and all the ice went up in smoke, a blue vapor that gathered several feet above the ground and then disappeared. A groan escaped me as I was released, no longer pinned down, the wounds healing but slower than before. I staggered to my feet anyway and looked around, expecting an attack at any moment. Only the howling wind. She was mocking me, playing with me, clearly thinking she had the upper hand in this fight, and she had. I couldn't deny that. I couldn't take many more hits like this and regenerate fully. In fact, my left shoulder didn't seem fully functional. I knew with growing certainty that one of the shards she'd shot at me, made of her own blood, hadn't left my body. It was wreaking havoc now. Give up, you are doomed. I will feed on your mate's dead body soon, the ice gallimate taunted. She was standing on a rock, almost 100 feet away from me, taunting, riling my anger like before. I knew this, but I couldn't stop myself. Images of Brittany dead enough to make my body jerk into action. I had everything to lose. I knew. I was a dead man, and so were Andy and Brittany if I didn't fight. Hopeless as things seemed, I would never give up. Face me then. No disappearing, just you and me and our weapons, I growled at her. She knew as well as I did that she was too fast, even in a more fair fight like that. It would give her every opportunity to toy with me until she decided she was ready to kill me. She laughed. Very well. In a flash, she was right next to me, having moved so quickly that even to my eyes she'd been only a blur. Her gown was tattered where I'd ripped open her belly before, but other than that, she appeared completely unscathed. Bother, her hands were encased in ice, forming long, sharp blades about the same as my own swords. She smirked. On the count of 3? I nodded as I teleported both my blades back into my hands and sunk into a defensive crouch. I had to kill her. There had to be a way. I just had to figure out how and survive until I did. 1, she said in an eerily sing-song voice. 2, I muttered, summoning fire to cover my own hands and weapons. 3, the Galamut yelled, and she spun away and around me, slashing with her weapons of ice at me. I spun with her, catching her icy blades with my fiery ones. There was no clanging sounds as our blades met, only a sizzling as ice met fire. I didn't know how long we spun around each other, dodging and parrying, attacking and feinting. It seemed like forever, while my left shoulder seemed to lose more and more strength. My left blade ever slower and slower to catch and block her attacks. Sweat breaking out all over my body, while she still seemed completely unaffected. I could not keep this up much longer while staying unharmed. That's when a plan formed in my mind. The first step easy, I slowed my left arm movements even further, catching her weapons only at the very last moment and focusing more on sidestepping and spinning out of the way if that was possible. I could see the smirk grow on her features as she said, "Oh, you've had your fun, boy. Regis, Pa, you're just an amateur." That's when I let my own trap close in on her. With a burst of speed she clearly wasn't expecting, using power fueled by my rage, I struck her wrist, hand and weapon severed instantly. She screamed this time, a wail like a banshee, and then just as I knew she would, she sprung backwards out of reach of my other blade, then focused on regrowing the limb. "Bad move," she yelled, and I could see in the way her eyes lit up, going from blue to violet as they mixed with red, that she was filled with the intent to kill now. "Not mine, though," I called back, taking hold of the huge boulder she was standing in front with my telekinetic abilities. Rolling it forward and over her, I heard the sickening crunching of bones. With my bare hands, I ripped a tree from the ground right next to me and flung it through the air, setting fire to it with a thought. The vapor that was the frost Galamut was just flowing out from under the rock when the ball of fire hit it. The vapor was slung one way, while the tree flung into another direction, the vapor slowly materializing into the badly burned and broken body of the icy woman. I rushed her, knowing that if I didn't make absolutely certain she was dead, she'd still be able to regenerate. Her body landed only a mere 50 feet away from the cottage, and I was on her in seconds. Blades of fire in my hands again as crouched over her, decapitating her in one fell swipe, then slamming my second blade home into her chest. I could only stare at her headless body for a few short seconds, my gaze blurry as I struggled to get screaming muscles and uselessly frayed tendons back under control. With the Galamut well and truly dead, it seemed like I'd lost complete control over my left arm. Other injuries, inflicted earlier, seemed to be reopening. Clearly, her attacks held some kind of venom that slowed or disabled the regenerative skills. I was just about to get to my feet and find Andy when I heard the gravel crunch behind me. A familiar scent tainted the air, and I instantly tried to spin around and bring up my weapons. Yet strength seemed to have fled my hands completely now. Both my swords fell to the ground with a clang, the fire around them extinguishing. I blinked once, twice, as I saw Fort step into my sight. The wolf wore a smirk and held a dagger in his hands. "Not so tough now, are you?" he gloated, stepping closer to me as I struggled to keep my vision from spinning now. A growl tore from my throat anyway, my fangs extending now that I no longer seemed able to control even that basic urge. Fort jumped back, out of reach, fear momentarily crossing his features. Was this how I would die? At the hands of a coward? I could not bring my body to do anything anymore. It was all I could do to remain kneeling beside the body of the Galamut, instead of sprawling face down and lose consciousness. I refused to do that. Refused to die without looking my killer in the face. Fort stepped back towards me, the dagger raised, poised to strike. "Brittany is going to be mine," the mutt grinned. That made me smile, and I could see that it unsettled him. If I died, so would Brittany. Clearly the mutt didn't know this. It was a small victory to know that the filthy creature would never lay his hands on her, even though it meant her death. I loved her so very much. Finding strength from somewhere deep inside of me, I struggled to raise a small rock behind him and slam it into his skull. I could see the stupid thing twitch, once, twice. Then it rolled over, clattering against other rocks and then remaining completely immobile. Give up. The wolf was right on top of me now, the blade pressed into the skin right above my heart. Die. The blade was cold as it slid home. This surprised me. I expected it to burn even as it severed the muscles of my heart. The last of my strength splashed down my chest in a red waterfall, and the force of the blade splattered it up across my face and all over Fort. I could taste the metallic twang of my own blood just as blackness slid in from the sides and rolled over me. At least I wouldn't feel it when the wolf decapitated me. I hoped it didn't hurt when Brittany died to follow me into the afterlife. Yes, I exclaimed, Shadow Peak. And I need to be there now. You heard my grandfather. I couldn't and didn't hide the urgency behind my words. Every second counted. If I wanted to help Alexander, I was so very certain that he'd run straight into his death. The world dissolved around me into a blue swirl, and for a moment, everything seemed to spin. Black, the only thing visible behind the swirling blue. Then we hit solid ground. It slammed through my ankles and brought me to my knees. The landing much rougher than I expected it to be. Danis was partially underneath me, lying on the ground yet still holding onto my hand. My heart jumped into my throat. Oh no! Did the strain hurt him? Kill him? Then he groaned. Sorry, Brittany. I forgot to adjust for the fact that I was still lying. You okay? I drew in an incredibly relieved breath. Yes, perfect. Now get help for Lysander. I patted the witch on his shoulder as I helped pull him to his feet. We were both a little unsteady still. He nodded. Brittany, be careful. I know backup is on its way, but it'll take them at least another 10 to 20 minutes to get here. With his only hand, he reached up and softly stroked my cheek. You're a brave girl. He disappeared in a flash of blue. That left me alone on what appeared to be an empty road. On either side, the forest loomed over, in an almost threatening stance. The road led downhill and out of sight around a turn in one direction and uphill in a more straight line in the other direction. That's where I had to go. Picking up the fallen silver candlestick, I clutched it tightly in my hand. It was probably the best weapon I had right now. I ignored the blood on the end, Lysander's blood, and decided to simply be happy that it had been teleported along. Then I started running up the hill, hoping that it wasn't too far and that I wasn't too late. I reached the top a few minutes later, out of breath and terrified of what I would find. I wasn't prepared for the sight of Alexander fighting with a blur, white and blue only occasionally visible. They were still so far away. The rocky hilltop was much bigger than it had appeared. A small cottage at least 300 feet away from me still, and Alexander and his opponent at least another 200 beyond that. I started out for the cottage, keeping my senses wide open. That had to be where they kept Andy, the cottage that I'd seen through Fort's eyes. I was certain it wasn't. For Alexander was fighting with now. That white and blue blur moved too gracefully to be him. Alexander was clearly hard-pressed to keep up his defenses. They spun around each other and clashed blades in a beautiful, deadly dance. I'd seen Alexander practice a time or two, and I knew that he wasn't fighting as well as he could. I was certain he was still tired. He couldn't have slept much since he fought Thornton's forces. I knew he wouldn't have even tried. With Andy missing, he had no doubt been too fired up, too worried to even think about rest. As I ran for the cottage, I could see how Alexander appeared to be slowing down, focusing more on avoiding the blindingly fast creature he was fighting. His left arm barely in time to block savage thrusts with what appeared to be spikes of ice. When I'd first spotted them, I'd only known it was Alexander out there because I recognized the fiery blades he was using. Now I could clearly see it was him, still in his armor, but his chest covered in red blood. He was losing. My heartbeat shot up and I shook my head in denial. No, he couldn't be. He was the most powerful creature here. He had to be, right? Rushing out here, I'd expected him to be forced to fight against some kind of overwhelming force. Or maybe that he'd be tricked into giving himself over to save Andy, my brother used as a hostage. Not this. I forced my legs to run faster and get to the cottage. Get to where Alexander was fighting the still blindingly fast creature that fought with weapons of ice. But I knew I also had to look out for Fort. He was out here somewhere, and he would be only too happy to see me. I wasn't even halfway there when things changed. A keening wail pierced the howling of the wind. It sounded like a woman, and as I looked at the Alexander, I saw that I was right. His opponent was finally visible, and it was clearly a woman. Tall and pale white with hair the color of sapphires. Her eyes a horrible violet color that I could still see clearly from this distance. She was wearing a wispy white dress, torn at the middle and stained blue with some kind of liquid. It appeared as though she was saying something now as she held her wrist in one hand, and that's when I realized her other hand was missing. Alexander had managed to cut it off. I felt a momentary shiver of horror run down my spine, and then I shook myself. No doubt this creature was an evil menace. Terribly powerful too if she was such a strong adversary against Alexander. She was walking backwards, stepping out of my mate's range now. I couldn't see how it happened, but a huge boulder behind her rolled forward with sickening speed. Even where I stood, I could hear the sickening crunching of bones. It had me rooted to the spot. I couldn't seem to get myself to move. Barely any time passed yet. I saw Alexander move with lightning speed, uprooting a tree barehanded. The entire thing lifted high above his head, his arms not even shaking as he threw the massive thing, hurling it through space, right at the boulder that had crushed the woman. It burst into fire on its way, lighting up as if it had been doused in gasoline. I wasn't sure if I could believe what my eyes were telling me now. There was some kind of blue fog seeping out from beneath the boulder, right into the path of the burning tree hurtling towards it. A bang. My ears rang from it, and I fell to my knees trembling in shock, a hot pain searing through my temples. My fingers came away from my ears bloody. Looking up, I blinked once, twice. Where did they go? I scrambled around. How could I lose sight of them just like that? Where did Alexander go? The cottage? I got to my feet again and started running towards the derelict building once more. Where the hell did they go? Was the woman dead? I couldn't hear properly, it seemed, and the world still seemed to tilt and turn as if I was running across a ship at sea in a storm. I felt drunk as I made my way as fast as I could to the cottage. If Alexander was there, if Andy was there, I had to help them. The last few feet seemed like they took forever, but then I finally rounded the corner. I hardly had time to take in the scene in front of me, but I could see a headless body, clearly the woman from before, on the ground. The blue-haired head rolled away, partially covered behind a rock. Alexander was on his knees beside it, one of his hands still on the sword embedded in her chest, almost as if he was leaning on it. His other hand hanging limply at his side, his second sword lying uselessly beside it. He was bleeding heavily from his shoulder, and his throat was also bleeding, looking as if someone had scraped of the skin there. It was a ravaged mess. He was bleeding from a lot more places on his body, and I couldn't understand why he wasn't regenerating. Was he that exhausted? Drained of power? He seemed unable to move. Fort stood right in front of him. All I could see was his back. But I knew it wasn't good. His arm seemed like he was about to strike Alexander. All this I saw in a flash, and I reacted in pure instinct. Rushing forward, my arms raising the heavy silver candlestick high above my head. It came down on Fort's head with the loudest crunch I'd ever heard, the first sound I heard since the bang. Things seemed to happen in slow motion then. The wolf slowly collapsed, sinking down and back towards me, showing me for a moment a clear look into Fort's eyes, a strangely surprised look in them. A look that turned confused and then hurt in a fraction of a second, as if he didn't understood why I'd hurt him. Then his face contorted, his jaw elongating as a wolf's snout forced its way out of his face and then back again. It looked gruesome. Blood was pooling around him rapidly. Behind him, Alexander collapsed in on himself, slumping backwards equally as slow, a dagger protruding from his chest, from his heart. No. I stepped over Fort without a thought and kneeled beside my mate, the dagger I pulled out immediately. He'd regenerate then, right? Yet nothing seemed to happen. Only more blood kept gushing out of the wound. No, this wasn't right. What was wrong? Alexander. No, don't die. There was no response. Just the faint rise and fall of his chest that seemed to be more and more sporadic with each passing moments. That's when I was blasted with feeling. Fort's death unmasking my bond with him. I nearly collapsed at the pain that shot all throughout my body. Alexander was in absolute agony. All of it coming, not from the dagger wound that had pierced his heart, but his left shoulder. the most healed injury of all. The feelings pressed down on me as if I was being crushed by a giant hand, my lungs constricting and laboring to breathe, not just for myself, but for Alexander too now. His mind was blank. He was unconscious, yet I could sense that his last conscious thoughts had been of me. He thought he was going to die and that I would die with him. No, he was immortal. He couldn't die. He said he'd heal as long as his brain hadn't been removed. His brain? Feeling terrified, I still reached over and gently lifted his head, feeling for injuries there, yet I couldn't find anything. I sighed in relief. That couldn't be it then. He'd survive. But with each passing second, he seemed to grow fainter, paler, his breathing more shallow. And as his breathing got shallow, so did mine. My own heart already seemed to be struggling to keep up its rapid tempo. "Damn it, Alexander." I screamed at him, but there was no response. No movement behind his eyelids, no strengthening of his breathing, no closing of the gaping hole in his chest. The ravaged mess of his throat wasn't healing, nor the holes in his shoulders and thigh. I tried sending him my strength, my power. It felt like his body was taking it in, soaking it up like a sponge. And for a moment, it seemed like his breathing got easier. Only a moment. He was a vampire. Blood. Maybe if I gave him my blood, that always worked in books and movies, right? I pulled a slim dagger from the holster at my waist quickly and slid it across my open palm without a second thought. Then I held it over his mouth, squeezing his cheeks to hold it open and force my blood down his throat. He didn't even swallow, and I had to rub his throat to get his body's reflex to work. This was not good. Was there color returning to his face? Please live. This had to work. Yet nothing to his situation changed. I could feel the pain getting worse, dragging him down into the greedy jaws of death. Suddenly there was a hand on my shoulder. Whirling around, I raised the dagger in my hand, slashing at my assailant, only managing to stop myself just in time. Andy, my baby brother, stood just behind me, his eyes huge and luminous. He appeared not to have even seen the dagger that had come within an inch of his throat. "It's all right, Brittany," he said, his voice incredibly mature and solemn. It was the first time in my life that he'd ever said my name correctly. A shiver shot down my spine. There was something different about him. Something old. Something ancient. He stepped past me and then kneeled beside Alexander, not caring about the blood that had pooled around him. His small hands he held above my mate's body, and his eyelids slid closed, hiding the burning gold. Time altogether seemed to have stopped then. I couldn't seem to do anything other than hold Alexander's hand tightly in mine, wishing him to live, willing my own life's power into his body. My other hand I placed on Andy's shoulder, silently sending him my support as well. At first there was no change, no visible signs, but I could feel the burning in Alexander's shoulder intensify. It felt as if more tissue was tearing and ripping. It made him fainter, his breathing hardly there any longer. The pain was getting unbearable even to me now. I could feel Alexander's pain, yet I could also sense Andy's pain through my connection with him. Andy was feeling exactly what Alexander was feeling, and also what I was feeling. It was stacking up on itself, a cascade effect. With every passing second, it was getting worse for both him and me. Sweat was breaking out all over my body, and also all over Andy's, as we fought to stay conscious, fought to save Alexander. How I didn't know yet? Then I saw something blue come out of the small hole in his left shoulder. A tiny crystal shard. Without having been told, I slapped it away with the dagger still in my hand, knowing that it needed to be as far away from all of us as possible. Andy had done that, somehow. The pain was still steadily getting worse, bouncing and stacking up between Andy and me, yet Alexander's breathing was easing up, his wounds knitting together now at a slow but even pace. I could even see him swallow a few times himself, accepting the blood I'd given him on his own now. As I felt the pain coming from Alexander lessen, I also felt the cascading effect recede, just in time, because I was ready to pass out. Andy straightened and stepped back suddenly, stumbling a little, but then apparently regaining his senses as the distance grew. The pain between his mind and mine also lessening some more. I couldn't believe what had just happened, but I hardly cared as I noted the even breathing, the slowly closing wounds on my mate. That's when the tears finally came. Relief. He was going to live, and Andy was safe. His gray eyes snapped open and found mine instantly, his mouth shaping my name silently, his vocal cords at the moment still too damaged for him to speak. I instantly noticed that I could no longer feel his pain though. He was already shielding both me and Andy from it. The only thing clearly coming through now was his intense love for me and relief. I fed him the same feelings greedily. "Hey, you're amazing. I don't know what you did, but..." A sob escaped my throat and I squeezed Alexander's hand tightly, reaching out with my other arm towards my baby brother. My brother who'd worked a miracle somehow. He directed golden eyes at me, still solemn and ancient. Then his shoulders slumped and he rushed into my arms. "Amzy!" I was so scared. It felt good to hold my little brother in my arms again, finally. Even better was it when Alexander managed to sit up and wrap his own arms around us tightly. None of us cared that he was still bleeding a little and smearing all of us with blood. Well, how touching. A little family reunion. How come I wasn't invited? A voice suddenly spoke from behind us. We all stiffened and then almost as one turned our heads to look at the demon. Raim had finally decided to show up on the scene. Alexander growled. His throat healed enough now for him to speak. "Raim, you're not welcome here and you're too late." My mate's hand tightened on Andy's shoulder as he spoke to him more gently. "Hey, I'm going to teleport you home. Don't be scared." I wasn't sure if he had enough power to attempt that, but I could feel how determined he was. He was going to try no matter what, intent entirely on saving my brother's life. The demon, only 10 feet away from us, laughed. "That would be your death right there, Mr. Mest. Clitton. That's why he isn't going to." That was Andy's voice, ringing clear across the mountain peak. The strong wind around us whipped his hair around his face wildly as he stepped out of our embrace and out of Alexander's reach. He stepped in front of us, his little body between Alexander and I and the demon. "Andy," Alexander exclaimed, struggling to surge to his feet, shock and anger coursing through our bond, telling me how frustrated he was by his apparent weakness at the moment. "It's okay, Alex. I'm not scared." "Not anymore," Andy said, and the eerie quality was back in his voice. His posture confident, although he still looked so frail, so human otherwise. "You should be, boy. You're going to die." The demon was smirking, clearly under the impression that he was the one in control. It looked like that to me, too. Alexander was obviously unable to put up much of a fight right now. I knew I'd be useless. I doubted I'd be lucky enough to get in a good hit with my faithful candlestick again. "Am I?" Andy asked, stepping in closer to the demon. Both Alexander and I froze completely when he did so, fearing for his life. Yet Andy simply lifted one hand. "I thank you for the lessons, for your help training and strengthening my powers. Now it is you who dies." The demon blanched and then stumbled backwards. "You wouldn't. It would hurt you too." Fear evident in his red, blazing eyes. "Yes, it would, but that doesn't matter," Andy replied gently, almost as if he was explaining something to a toddler. Andy made another step in the demon's direction, his next words snatched away by the howling wind. Yet the demon seemed to have heard them just fine. He looked as if he'd been struck by a physical blow. Alexander flinched too, and then walls shot up around his mind to make absolutely certain that I couldn't glimpse Andy's last words from his mind. Had they been that terrible? The demon was backing up in earnest now, and then suddenly he started to go up in smoke, swirling once and dematerializing completely. My little brother had scared away an ancient demon that had terrorized the earth for centuries. Alexander struggled to his feet at last, still leaning heavily on me. "Andy, thank you." He turned around to look at us both then, with eyes so golden that they almost seemed to cast a light, staring at us for several long seconds, as if he hardly knew who we were. "Andy?" I asked. That's when his posture softened, wilted almost, and he was the boy again that I knew. "Amma?" He stepped towards us and then collapsed. Alexander caught him, somehow managing to move quick enough despite his completely drained reserves and healing body. "Andy." It felt like I couldn't breath. First almost losing Alexander, and now Andy. "No, he's only sleeping a gramokroy. He's exhausted," my mate whispered, sinking on his knees and cradling my baby brother tightly in his arms. "Just sleeping." I started crying again, relief so strong washing through me that I had to kneel down beside Alexander and press kisses to both their faces in turns. "I love you so much," slipped from my throat again, and I meant it for both of them. In the distance, I heard voices. Familiar voices. Alexander hardly responded to them, but he did tighten his arms around us. I love you, Brittany. Then the others were upon us. Jaden and Lysander, Samuel and Seraton, and even Danis and Sarah and more people. But their faces were all blurs. I could only focus on Alexander and Andy. I wouldn't let go of either of them as we were ushered into a car and driven home. All I could think was, they were safe now. I was safe now. Fort was dead. The demon had been scared away, and the stupid war for Alexander's territory had been averted. We'd won. 3 years later, Alexander leaned forward to lift the lid of the pan and stir its contents, sniffing the air suspiciously. This doesn't smell right. Lie, you sure you read the recipe correctly? The Draco seated at the table shrugged, who cares? Staring contently into the face of the tiny infant in his arms was all he had eyes for anyway. If Alex's attempt at dinner failed again, he'd simply get Danis to fix him something, or maybe he'd go out for dinner. Danis laughed loudly. You are terrible, Alex. Give it up, will you? You'll have a lot more happy around if you do. The witch flexed his golden arm, a habit he'd gained since losing the limb. It was to reassure himself he really wasn't dreaming. Tonextic had somehow managed to make him the thing. It was pure magic, and neither Alexander or Samuel had in all their lifetimes seen something of the like. It was just as good as Danis's real arm had been, just golden. Shut up, Ely. Go bother my sister, Alexander growled half-heartedly. Fine. I'll go bother Sarah. She loves it when I do. Danis was up and out the door quickly, but as he passed the stove, he couldn't resist sniffing the sadly failed food on the stove. Oh yeah, looks delicious, man. Do you want me to kick your ass, boy? Alexander exclaimed in annoyance. It's not funny. The boy laughed loudly as he left, walking only a tad bit faster to make sure the almighty vampire wasn't truly pissed off and really meant to chase him. Alexander just sighed and shrugged as the door closed. He had to admit it. He was terrible at cooking, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't make a single edible thing. He should just give up. He looked at the Draco sitting with his feet propped up at the table again. I swear you spend more time with my daughter than I do, the Regis said, appearing by Lysander's side to pluck the contently sleeping infant from his arms, already humming his lullaby to the fresh-faced little girl. The baby barely stirred, opening sleepy eyes only once to look at who was holding her. They were the same golden eyes that Brittany had. Alexander sighed happily. She's so beautiful. Laughter, low and male and slightly mocking. Yeah, for a wrinkled little piglet, she's quite the eye-catcher. Shut up, Samuel, Lysander snarled, already jumping to his feet and spinning to glare at the Jotun as he entered the kitchen. She's perfect, Samuel smirked. You're just in love. Lysander was already opening his mouth to retort furiously when he was interrupted. She's mostly hungry, that's what I think, Andy piped up, entering the kitchen on the heels of the tall Viking. Right on cue, the infant started wailing loudly, and not even Alexander's gentle humming could calm her down now. The empathic boy had grown, and his voice was occasionally changing pitch now, completely out of control. Much to Andy's annoyance and the great amusement of the rest of us. Alexander smiled. Agamo quoi, you better get down here. Your daughter is hungry. He sent her the thought as he switched off the stove with a flick of his telekinetic powers, as moved over to the rocking chair by the window. Oh, and it's only my daughter when she's hungry, is she? Already on my way. Brittany's laughter echoed gently through Alexander's head as he stuck his pinky in his daughter's mouth to silence her wailing and satisfy her hunger for a short moment. The door swung open to the living and Brittany strode in, lighting up the room and making all the males sit up straight. Lysander dropped his feet from the dinner table and Andy quickly hid his dirty hands behind his back. So, how's dinner coming along? The love of Alexander's life said as she took the little infant from his arms with expert care, settling down on the rocking chair and nestling the beautiful girl to her breast like she'd done 100 times before. She stopped crying instantly, and a soft suckling filled the room. Aye, gotta go, Samuel exclaimed, and he rushed from the room. See you at dinner, Andy added, and he followed the giant. Lysander was also getting to his feet in a hurry. Yeah, I think I'll join them for a bit. Bye. The door fell shut behind them with a soft thud, the men in this house always mindful for the tiny baby. Brittany laughed. They're all so squeamish about something so natural. Alexander just shrugged, rubbing a finger over his daughter's chubby little cheek. I don't mind. I rarely have the two of you all to myself. Oh shush, We have all night to ourselves, and Lysander is the perfect babysitter. Our precious little babai feels right at home with him. Brittany told her mate with a soft smile on her face as she looked down at the golden-haired child. Her eyes strayed up towards the mantel above the fireplace. On it, a heavy silver candlestick, slightly crooked and dented, yet proudly displayed. The very candlestick that Brittany had used to kill Fort with. Lysander had tried sneaking it out several times, but Alexander had always brought it back. For reasons the Dracos wouldn't explain to Alexander, he had a fierce hatred for the thing. Alexander followed her look and nodded. It's exactly 3 years since that day. There's still been no sign of the demon Rame. He carefully took the baby, now done feeding, from Brittany so she could rearrange her clothing. Yes, I know, Andy isn't scared, he says. The demon is terrified of him. Alexander nodded, and rightly so. But I don't believe it's the last we've heard from that monster. If he could, he would still take Andy's powers for himself, and Andy still can't see Talanistic. The video conferences seem to satisfy the both of them for now. We'll just have to worry about it when the day comes. I refuse to live in fear. Brittany held out her arms again to take the little girl back in her arms. Only happy things lie in our future. Alexander, I'll make sure of it. The Regis of Northern America looked down at his beautiful half-angel mate and precious little babai. Yes, you are right.